All persons who anticipate speaking on any public hearing item must fill out an oath card to be heard on the agenda item and sign the oath contained therein. These cards are located on the table nearest the entrance to the council chamber and may be obtained from the recording secretary. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with the procedures adopted in Resolution 24-1997. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first. Those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on the item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side, for or against, may cross-examine. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents that you desire for the commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence or be retained by the city. Please submit such exhibits to the recording secretary. Staff?
Look, the next step is we need a roll call to order.
Okay.
Or the roll call.
We'll do a roll call, please.
Chairman Williams, Vice Chairman Shavir.
Here.
Secretary Chambers.
Here.
Member Baker. Here. Member Taylor.
Here.
Member Severs.
Here.
Member Noel Copeland.
Here.
School Board Member Hare.
Here.
Next is approval of the minutes.
If you're wondering what's going on, we're just a little messed up since our meetings are approval of the minutes, please. Approval of the minutes, please.
I indicated to staff one correction. That's on page 3. At the bottom of the page, the property owner at this time were assessed. It's A-C-C-E-S-S. That should be assessed a fee. Unless I hear other corrections, I move for approval with that one amendment.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
It's approved.
I believe typically you would read the next part was the quasi-judicial confirmation procedures.
The following items are subject to quasi-judicial rules of procedure. Anyone wishing to speak on any of these items must first sign a public hearing agenda card and sign the oath contained therein. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first. If you have any photographs, sketches, or documents you desire for planning and zoning to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and be retained by the city. Submit these exhibits to the recording secretary. Thank you.
I believe the next items, you do not have anything on your consent or old business, and so we can go straight to new business. All the items have been advertised. There are only 2 items at the end that did not require advertisement. So if you'd like, I'll go into the first item here. So the first item is under 9A. It's an ordinance related to storage of materials, and that starts on page 11 of your packet, which you should be able to control on your computers now. And if you have issues, please tell us, or maybe a neighbor can help you. But page 11 of your packet will bring you to the cover page of that agenda item. Hearing no concerns, I'm going to go ahead and give you a brief description of that. It's an ordinance related to correcting or at least clarifying an issue that we have been dealing with code enforcement. On page 12 of your packet, you'll see a red line strike through of the code, of the current code, and you'll see new language being added in there to clarify when materials related to new development can be stored on site prior to actual commencement of development. And the reason for this is to address issues we've been dealing with through code enforcement procedures, or the code enforcement board rather, due to some violations we've been finding. And so this right here clarifies when those materials, those construction materials, can be stored on that site. So that's basically the gist of this ordinance. I'll try and answer any questions you have about this one. Again, it's page Page 12 of your packet. That's you'll see the red line strike through version of this ordinance. Yes, ma'am.
So my question is, how is commencement of the permitted activity defined? How is commencement defined?
An issued permit allows you to go ahead and commence construction.
Right, but,
So once you have an issued permit, then you have a certain amount of time to go ahead and commence construction. And what this is saying is you got to be able to, 30 days prior to actual commencement, prior to actual construction, starting clearing or whatnot on that property or putting in infrastructure is when you can go ahead and have
so
that.
that's what I'm asking, is how is commencement defined? Is it when I start clearing? Is it when I?
Depends on the permit, because every
Right, so
permit's a little
is it clear,
different.
though, in a permit, what defines commencement? Because otherwise, you're saying it's you can store your materials 30 days prior to some event, but then you have to define what is that event?
I think that the code is interpreted where that subsequent event must take place at least, or no more than 30 days after that storage of materials begins. And so if there is storage of materials for more than 30 days, then that would be a code violation of this section as proposed.
Absolutely understand, but I store my materials there, 29 days later, I cut a tree down. Have I commenced?
It depends on whether you have a permit to do that work and whether the materials are related to cutting that tree down.
Because every permit, let me just chime in here, because every permit is a little different depending on what you're trying to do. So if all you've received is a permit for clearing, cutting down that tree starts that commencement of that permit. But your permit could include other things in addition to the clearing as well.
I just want to make sure that that as long as the permits themselves identify or define what commencement looks like, then I'm fine with the language as it is. Otherwise, I think you may just be kicking the can down the road by saying it's 30 days prior to something that is also vague.
The reason that an owner would be allowed to have construction materials on site would be for the purpose of pursuing some development activity, and they would be notified that they could only keep it for 30 days until the beginning of that, and I think that that information would be incorporated into the permit. And after this language is codified, then the building department would have that ability to give that instruction
Okay.
as part of the permit.
You said this came out of issues with, I assume, people storing materials. Long, but does that mean they have a permit to do something and then they store materials and they don't commence for 4 months? Or is this storing of materials prior to even having a permit?
Both are scenarios that we've experienced.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Would it help with the issue if we reworded that to be 30 days prior to issuance of the permit? Once you issue the permit, you can proceed. You don't even have to bother about the word commencement. Once you get a if you can't have the materials more than 30 days prior to you getting a permit.
My understanding is that there are scenarios where there is a permit issued and the work has not been commenced. And there's construction materials on site that are being stored under the guise of being used for this permit where no activity has commenced. And I don't know that changing the word to issuance would solve the issue that I'm describing.
Because once you have a permit, you have a year to action it, or 6 months to action that permit, right, to start.
Correct.
Subject to some interpretation, yes.
Okay, so I think that's the issue. They don't want it.
Okay.
Can they do an extension on the permit for storing the materials, or is that written in stone that they only have 30 days to commence?
Right now, the way that the city approaches the storage of materials is not written into the code, and so I think that this modification would address the situation that we have not found a solution to, other than what's before you tonight.
This provides clarification where there's none right now. So if any permit can be extended under certain procedures, but the actual storage, the materials, so let's say they have the permit or they've extended it, and then they have a certain date as to when they are going to start construction or the activity according to the permit. This says that you got, 30 days before that actual date, you can go ahead and store your material on that site.
I guess my question is, can they extend that? You know, if they're on day 28, can they extend this particular item to go beyond 30 days?
Go
Or
ahead.
is this
I
written in
think that it would-
stone? Will they be fined? What's the?
I think that it would be case specific to the permit requested by the owner of the property, because if a permit is issued, then work must commence within 6 months in order for it to not expire. And in this scenario that this ordinance would apply to, the storage of materials would be put on the site, and the owner would be able to extend the permit if activity is conducted. And the issue would be whether or not the storage of materials are related to the activity that's being conducted. And so it would be case by case. The application as far as code enforcement of this section would be that if there is no permitted activity going on after 30 days of that material, then a code enforcement case could be generated concurrently with an active building permit, because they're two separate matters.
So they would file a code violation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And use your microphone, please. I'm sorry. Your microphone.
Staff like to comment on this particular item? Any more?
We do not have any additional information to provide on this item. We'll take any questions you have or any questions maybe from the public. It is a public hearing
Okay.
on this, for this ordinance.
Are there any other cards?
No cards on this item.
Okay. Do we need a vote on this?
You'll need to open and close the public hearing.
Okay. Open to the public, close to the public. Next item.
After that, then we'll need a motion on the
Oh,
item.
I'm sorry. Do we have a motion on this item?
I move to approve the ordinance on storage materials.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Member Baker?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Taylor?
Yes.
Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Member Severs?
Yes.
Motion passes.
The next item before you is an ordinance related, it's on, agenda item 9B, and that starts on page 14 of your packet. And this is related to permitting projections into setbacks in the multifamily high-density residential R3 zoning district.
Mr. Chairman, I am going to recuse myself from voting on this item. As you see the form before you, the memorandum before you, I am directly influenced on this item, as I am the one who advocated to the City Council to incorporate this item into the agenda tonight.
Thank you. And Lori, would you record that, please? Thank you.
And I will be going down there.
Again, the agenda item starts on page 14 of your packet. I'll briefly describe or read the agenda cover sheet here. Again, this is an ordinance addressing or allowing certain projection or certain additions to buildings to project into the rear yard setback. This is based on a request of a citizen to City Council to approve an advisability directing staff to draft this ordinance, to develop an ordinance that would permit certain structures to project into the rear yard setback in this particular zoning district. The ordinance would permit elevated decks and open porches of balconies rather, of townhomes within the R3 zoning district to project into the rear yard setback. We did not define that specific projection into that rear yard setback. We're going to ask you to make a recommendation as to what that is. This ordinance is limited to those townhomes within that R3 zoning district that are along a water body. So the setback is to a rear yard setback that's adjacent to a water body. Open stairs, fire escapes, and chimneys on townhomes may project no more than 4 feet into the required side or rear yard. That's also included in this ordinance. So I'm going to take you to page 15 of your packet. and that starts the title of the ordinance. And you'll see a table there that comes directly from our code. It's section 28-307. That is the development standards for the R3 zoning district. You can see that a lot's area in that table, it tells you how large each townhome lot is allowed to be within that zoning district. A minimum size, 2,000 square feet. There's a lot width on starting on page 16 of 20 feet. There's a density of maximum 15 units per acre. Further down, you're going to see setback standards, front, rear, side, and corner. The front setback of a townhome on a fee simple lot is 25 feet. On an interior side is 10 feet. Now, a townhome can have no more than 6 actual individual units within a building. So you can have 2 townhomes one on either side of the building. They're going to have their own side yards. The interior townhomes obviously are not going to have side yards. The rear setback is what's going to be impacted by this ordinance, and that is to the 25-foot rear yard setback in this zoning district for townhomes. And you'll see that again on page 16 of your packet. The red line, strike through, underline that you see on that, in that ordinance, in that table there, is really indicating the changes. You'll see we've added some footnotes. On page 17 of your packet, you'll see at the top there footnote number 2. This change is specifically for townhome developments. And then it refers you to another section of the code, section 30-151 of the code, called projections. And so I'm going to bring you down to page 18 of your packet. And I'll slow down in case I've gone too fast on this. You'll see this existing section of the code, 30-151, called projections in the code, page 18 of your packet again. And you'll see new language there added there, and I'll read it out real quick. For all zoning districts, unless specified elsewhere in this section, and then so on, the existing language. What's important is on the next page, page 19 of your packet. And you'll see a new subparagraph D. And I'll read it real quick here. Within any townhome development adjacent to the Indian River Lagoon and located in the R3 district, elevated decks or balconies, excluding screen rooms or other enclosures, on townhouses may project into the rear yard setback toward the water where the property is adjacent to a major water body or common area. Open stairs, fire escapes, and chimneys on townhouses may project no more than 4 feet into the required side or rear setback. So in this scenario, if there is a townhome and the rear of the townhome already encroaches into the required 25-foot rear yard setback, they can't add a fire escape or chimney or something in the back because they're already encroaching into that rear yard setback. What this is saying, though, you can add a balcony or a deck to the back, but it's not specifying how far that projection should be. So that's what we're here to ask you about. What would you recommend to City Council for that to be? We've included on page 21 of your packet, there are 2 developments that currently exist on the Indian River Lagoon that would be impacted by this ordinance. The first one is a development called Sagrant's River Townhomes, and there's an image there that shows you what it looks like looking from the water. And then the other development is Hidden Cove Townhomes. And there's an image there on the bottom there that shows you kind of what it looks like looking from the water. So with that, I'll try and answer any questions you may have about this ordinance. And again, we're asking for your input on what that specific projection should be.
Do any of the members have a question on this for staff? No questions? Member Copeland?
In one place it says on any major water body or something like that, and then in other places it specifically refers to the Indian River Lagoon. Is there a reason that it's not consistent?
No, ma'am. We can certainly clarify that.
Okay, thank you.
Member Severs?
Since both of those parcels are on the, within the Titusville Shoreline Overlay District, I note in accordance with Section 30-63 that there is certain setbacks for lots within Titusville Shoreline Overlay developed with a principal use prior to the effective date of this ordinance. There's a 25-foot setback, and for larger lots of 100 to 150 feet, 35 feet, and greater than 100 feet, 50 feet. Does that code also apply to this situation?
Yes, sir. That would be a more stringent requirement, and I believe you're talking about the shoreline protection. So there is a lot that is adjacent, the rear lot of that, or the rear property boundary of that lot is the mean high water line of the Indian River Lagoon. Their setback, according to what you just read here, would be that, I guess, if I'm correct, that 25 feet. That is more stringent than the actual setback of the zoning district itself. So that would be in that particular scenario.
And this does not, the proposed ordinance, does it change this 30-63, the shoreline protection setback?
No, sir.
Do we know how that ordinance 30-63 would apply on those two properties you've identified?
I believe in this scenario, because if there is a particular lot that, again, in that scenario where it has mean high water line as its back property boundary, they would be held to the higher, the more stringent setback according to that 30-63, which you referenced here.
Well, certainly I can just simply look at the Sagrin units, and you can clearly see that the mean high water line is within a few feet of the back of those parcels. And just a matter of information, historically, when that property was built, there was quite an outrage by a lot of members of the community, and that's how the shoreline protection setbacks came about, was because of that development that almost was built on the water, so to speak. So just a point of information. So even if this is granted and we come up with something, any individual in the R3 situation still has to worry about Section 30-63 of the code.
That is correct. A more stringent criteria would apply. Yes, sir.
Okay.
If we need clarification, we can certainly do that in this ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Part of the unusual thing I see here, because I double-checked the zoning map, part of the Sagrin's townhouses are in R3, and part of them are in R2. So this code, if it helps them any, would be applying only to the R3, which frankly I find very unusual to draft a code applying in this manner. That's extremely unusual to do so. In addition, I would like to know what, as you and I discussed, I pointed out to you, well, they could put a 20-foot deck on the back because it didn't specify any limits, or a 5-foot or 10-foot. And do you really want variations of additional decks on the second, third floor, or whatever it may be on various units? I'm not sure you would even want that. Aesthetically, it may not look appropriate. But staff doesn't have a recommendation on the one way or the other?
Our understanding is that this ordinance is intended, or the request to City Council was intended to help the development, especially Hidden Cove, to address the making their rear additions more uniform. There has been a history in that particular development, for example, where there was existing balconies and decks that were already developed with the original development that were then enclosed into living space, and then the property owners then subsequently, or later property owners, asked for a new addition to be added at the back for a new deck or a balcony. And then they came into, they confronted an issue about encroaching into their rear yard setbacks. So some property owners are going to, I think several property owners, if they want to continue to do that, are going to have a serious issue with meeting the code or having to get variances. So I believe what was petitioned to the city council in the request for this ordinance was to address that issue to make it more uniform for all the rear lots. We did the best we could based on the advisability we received from city council, and to lessen the impact to a few developments as we can find. And so that's what we found here, was that really it would be impact the Sagrants development and the Hidden Code development. But as you've already mentioned, in both scenarios, if they are on the water and there's another section of the code, which you pointed out, that has a more stringent setback, that would apply in this case. So it's questionable whether it would be uniform to all the developments, yes. To all the units, excuse me.
I have a question for staff.
Yes.
Since this is not a private residence on a private lot, it's part of a development, is that correct? Townhouse, I mean, what are we looking at here?
Each townhome is individually owned, including the land underneath it, so it's a separate platted lot.
So they would not necessarily have to go before a board or homeowners association or anything. What I'm saying is these houses are all pretty uniform.
As far as the lot dimensions, I can't say. I didn't measure each of the lots. I know some of them. Like, for example, I've already described how the code allows you to build a townhome development with no more than 6 townhome units inside a building. So you're going to have the 2 end units have an actual side yard. So their yards are already different in size compared to the internal ones. So, and then you can also developer can also develop a townhome development where each of the units are staggered, so they don't necessarily have to be uniform. So that some front yards could be deeper than the neighbors. As long as they meet the setbacks, that's what the code requires when you're developing. As far as these 2 example developments we've found here that might be impacted by this ordinance, they were both developed, I believe, prior to the 1993 rezoning that happened citywide. So they may have been developed under a prior zoning code. And I know some property owners have been having issues with getting, they've had to get a variances that they want to add to the rear of their properties.
Mr. Chairman, you'll want to open up public comment. I know there's several members of the audience that want to speak to this item.
Do we have any cards on this?
Yes. Robin Taylor.
Hi, I'm Robin Taylor, 4997 River Edge Drive. I would like to submit some photographs that will be able to explain some of the situation that we're dealing with here. We were able to enclose our original 8-foot balconies that we had, and then what we are proposing to do is to extend beyond that another 8-foot balcony, which is we don't want to go any further than that. We were able to do the second, I'm not allowed to call it a balcony, it's a roof over the porch. We were allowed to do a screened-in porch where the roof facilitated a balcony, which only required a 10-foot setback. But the balcony requires a 25-foot setback, which I really don't really quite understand that, but I will pass this along and show you one circle is my particular unit, where I have, you can see my second floor balcony, and what I propose to do is put a balcony on the 3rd floor over top of that, which would not extend beyond the porch beneath. So it's still going to be within that limit. I will still have a 30-foot setback from the river. There have been 2 units they are the smallest lots in the complex that were permitted. They were allowed to do this. They have their second and third floor balconies, and they only have like 10 feet to the river. And I will show you, and this particular picture shows you those units that have already done what we are proposing. So, and like I said, those are the two smallest units in the complex that have already done this. So anybody else beyond that will be able to do what they've done. You can see that we've got like a box situation where there is no balcony, and it's caused nonconformity within the complex. So we are trying to bring the conformity back into the complex and make all the units look similar so that we can all come into conformity. And these two pictures show buildings that are in conformity, and you will see that that's what there are several units. I have several people here from the community that when we purchased into this complex, we were told we could do this. Well, I've been doing this for 5 years trying to get this to happen. And there's about 7 units that have enclosed their original balconies and would like to extend and do another 8-foot balcony. And you can see that is just 2 examples of the units that have enclosed their balconies and have not been able to build out. Those are in addition to my unit. So we are asking that you pass this particular item so we can bring our development into conformity.
I have a question for you. Is this the extension you're talking about?
Yes.
These here?
That particular unit has already extended and closed their original balconies, and then they added on another, those particular units didn't have the setback, so they were only able to add on a 6-foot balcony because of the setback.
So this is what you're adding on? Access? And this screen room here,
Yeah,
enclosed room?
That's actually part of the living space, both of those, the second and third floor unit. In fact, that's Mr. and Mrs. Hermanson's unit right here.
Was that closed up? Was that the balcony originally?
Yes.
And it wasn't closed?
Yes, that was originally the balcony. Now they would like to add a balcony onto that unit.
So you're talking about adding a balcony where these steps are?
Yes.
Okay. So you want to extend it beyond that?
Yes.
And how far out are you talking about?
8 feet. And that particular unit probably has about 70 feet to the river, so they're not going to be encroaching on the river setback.
Okay. So basically what you're saying is where these pavers are here, that's going to wind up being covered,
Yes.
okay, and then you'll have it...
Partially. Those pavers are going out, I believe they're going out further than 8 feet, but they just want to extend 8 foot. We're trying to bring that into the HOA documents where we can extend 8 feet. And there are already 5 units that already have done what we are proposing to you with permits and variances.
Are these the units?
That's another unit.
Okay, but this has already been extended out?
That one has not been extended. You can see the top floor, the 3rd floor on that.
Which is the ones that have been extended out?
That particular one has the 3rd floor extended. No, that's just showing the conformity.
Okay.
What we're trying to do in the whole development.
Okay, I'll pass these along. Now, are these going to be extended?
That particular unit, the one in the middle, is my particular unit.
Okay.
I have the second floor balcony. What I would like to do is have a third floor balcony that would extend above the second floor balcony, not beyond it, just what I actually have at this time.
And then all of this would change then?
I would have my balcony on the third floor.
Okay, and these windows would be gone, and you put in slider doors
Yes.
or whatever you're going to do?
Yes. But it would not extend beyond the second floor balcony. The second floor balcony is 8 feet. So the third floor balcony would be 8 feet to match the second floor balcony.
Let me ask you a question. I'm just curious. Is this an association?
Yes,
Okay, so have you presented this to your association? I mean,
yes, we already have
Oh,
approval.
you already have approval to do this?
Yes.
Okay.
And there, like I said, there are already 5 units that have already done this before 2013 with permits and no variances. I had to get a variance to have that second floor balcony.
Clarify, I'm sorry. You had to get variance for the first floor porch, and you needed variance for the second floor balcony, but that was what was not granted.
Right. It's not considered a balcony, it's considered the roof of the porch.
Okay, well, I'm just looking at this, okay, it's a little convoluted because a lot has been done, obviously, with or without permitting. And, I mean, it's great that you're coming before us to do this. Staff, you have any comment on this? Do you have any comment on this in terms of code and how this would work? I mean, because you're talking about changing a lot. This is not just putting an amp deck on. So how does that work when it comes to city codes and building, so on?
Typically, a zoning district is applied in various locations throughout the city, or it might be located in one larger geographic area of a city. And so when you change the zoning standards of that particular zoning district, it'll apply to all properties that are zoned in that particular zoning district, not just one property. What we tried to do, based on the advisability from City Council, the direction from City Council, was to tailor a zoning, a change to this particular zoning district that would be narrowed as much as possible to address this issue. And what we found was that it would really only impact only 2 properties within the zoning district based on these conditions. So that was our take, is to try and narrow the impact to other properties as much as possible.
So I'm just telling you how I'm viewing this, okay? I can see this happening if you get all the permits and the construction permits and everything is done the way it's supposed to be done. But how does that impact the other people in your association?
Well, like I said-
I mean, how is this, because obviously these are a group of townhomes. And so if everybody wants to go off on a tangent and do something different, normally you don't have that when you have an association. So, I mean, what I'm saying is, there's nothing wrong with doing this construction if you meet code and it's structurally sound and you're far enough away from the roof. That's all well and good. But the other people that live in this community, well, these homes are attached, how does that, I mean, it's okay with the community, it's not a big community, obviously.
It's 32 units.
Okay, so how does that affect everybody else?
Well, what we're trying to do, like I had mentioned, there are certain units, you have one example there where both balconies were enclosed but no balconies. You have my unit where I have one roof over a porch that's a balcony, I guess. And then you have some units that have the third floor enclosed, not the second floor. We're trying to bring the whole community into conformity where everyone would be able to enclose their original 8-foot balcony and then add on an 8-foot balcony, with the consideration that they would still have to follow the setbacks. The 2 smallest units have already done that, and So everybody else, there are many units in there that will not even require a variance because their lots are longer. So if we have, I don't know exactly the number, there's at least 8 or 9 units that have added on either a second floor or third floor enclosure of their balconies, and they would like to have the balconies added on another 8 foot. So if we can get everyone to gradually work into this conformity, we would come back to the original setback that everybody had as far as the staggering.
Hold on one second. I want to ask staff, this is the first time I've ever had anything like this, come before us. So I want to ask what staff feels like, what would it take to meet the building requirement, okay, for them to do this? Do you have any idea of, what I'm saying is, these buildings are all attached, and it's a community of sorts. So do we, here again, I'm getting into, I talked to you earlier about this, you can't, how do I say, you can't retrofit per se, you can't impose that on anybody. But if other people are interested in doing this, do we just take an individual and say, okay, you can do this, and then forget everybody else? I mean, how is this going to work if you make this improvement and you want to do this, and we say it's okay? How does it affect everybody else whose building's attached to the community? And I don't want to get into, telling people what to do or how to live, but it seems to me there's got to be the association, the group of people there should have to decide if this is okay. And if it's okay, then you can come before us and say, okay, these are the structural requirements that it's going to take to do this, and the engineering and architecturally, it's not going to get blown away in a hurricane and so on and so forth. You see where I'm going with this? I mean, I had about 10 people that were going to show up tonight, but I had mentioned the 2 smallest lots have already done this. My lot and Mr. Reineck's lot are some of the next smaller lots, which we have already done the porch below, so we have that second floor balcony. So ours would be probably the most impacted by this because we did require a variance. The ones beyond me will not even require a variance. They can just get a regular permit and do this without the variance, and they don't need this permission from the boards, from P&Z or City Council. So in other words, they could do that, and there's not very many units that would require this variance, so this would allow the whole community to come into conformity. the previous units that were improved, that was added on, correct? Their balconies?
Yes,
Okay. Did they get permits for that?
yes.
Okay. So they...
No variance.
Okay.
And their lots are smaller than mine.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Did you apply for a variance and it was turned down?
Yes. We applied for a variance for the second floor balcony, which was turned down, but we were allowed to have a screened porch on the first floor with only a 10-foot setback. The balcony requires a 25-foot setback. The screened porch only requires a 10-foot setback, which
So,
I don't see where either one, the balcony would be as intrusive as a screened porch.
Did I understand you correctly that other people did apply for variances and those were granted, but you applied for the same variance and it was denied?
I got the variance for the screened porch. So I was able to have my balcony that I wanted. I'm not allowed to call it a balcony, it's the roof of the porch, but it is a balcony. I have screened, I have sliding glass doors that go out onto it. You can see I have railings, so it's, you know, technically, I guess it's a balcony, but I have to call it a roof of the porch.
Thank you.
And the porch has a 10-foot setback, the balcony requires a 25-foot setback. I apologize for any loopiness. I've been sick for like 6 days, so.
Thank you. Any other questions?
and I'm ready to melt. Any other questions?
I have a question for staff. Does staff have an opinion on this? In terms of, thank you very much. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this item?
Yes, Tammy Hermanson.
Hello, my name is Tammy Hermanson. I live at 4969 River Edge Drive. Not to sound redundant, but I did notice that she didn't touch on the safety factor. My unit is the one that has the stairs that go straight into the big sliding glass doors. That's the wall of glass. There is no landing. So you come out of your sliding glass door straight downstairs. I'm not sure what the code is today on that, as far as having stairs coming straight out of the back of your building without a landing. And as far as the third floor balcony, having some sort of stairs or escape from the third floor in case of a fire or something like that would be a concern of mine as well. But I'm just asking for the board's approval on this recommendation for the setbacks. I really...
Thank you. Anyone else?
Can I make one more comment? The kitchen, the base of the steps that go up to the third floor is right at the kitchen. And if there's a fire in the kitchen, there would be no escape. So we would like the balcony on the third floor for safety reasons, which, you know, some of the people that have the third floor balcony have like an escape hatch, you know, opening with rope ladder or stairs, ladder that goes down to the second floor that would allow escape to be able to get out of danger.
Thank you.
No more cards.
I'm sorry, no more? I'm going to go back to staff on this because what's your recommendation, and what comments do you have on this?
Again, we just try to tailor this impact as much as possible to as few properties as we could. I can give you a little history about the variances that was referenced. There was a variance application number 15-2014, that's the year 2014 when it was applied, and there were two requests in that variance application that was submitted by Ms. Taylor. The first request was to allow an attached balcony, a new attached balcony, to encroach into the rear yard setback for a principal structure, which requires a 25-foot setback requirement. And so the recommendation from staff was denial of that, and the Board of Adjustment denied that variance request. In the same application, Ms. Taylor also asked for the attached screen porch. The code looks at attached screen porches, which are on the first floor, defined as on the first floor with a certain type of screening around it, as an accessory use, and so has a different accessory setback standard, which is more flexible than the principal structure. And she did not exceed that, did not encroach into it. But the reason she needed a variance for that was because in this zoning district, there is a 50% lot coverage maximum allowed for all buildings on a lot, which she would have exceeded by adding on this new porch. And so she was granted by the Board of Adjustment that part of her variance application to allow the additional porch on the first floor for a new total lot coverage to be from 50% to 60%. So then she submitted a permit application and was issued a permit to build the rear first floor screen porch. There's nothing prohibiting anybody from walking on top of a roof of a porch. The problem is she would like to add a new deck or balcony on the third floor, which was would require that variance to encroach into rear yard setback for a principal structure. That was denied by the Board of Adjustment. And so that's why we're here tonight, basically. She requested that the City Council consider amending the code to allow more flexibility for encroachment of attached structures to encroach into rear yard, basically. And so we, based on the directions from City Council, we tried to tailor this ordinance to impact as few properties as possible. And we received direction from City Council that we had to follow through on that. So our recommendation is to impact as few properties as possible.
Your recommendation, I'm sorry, what?
Our recommendation, based on how we tailor this, is to impact as few properties as possible. And to approve the ordinance.
So how, okay, you said that it's to have less of an impact on,
I think that the intent is to have an impact on as few other developments other than the one that is being discussed here tonight. Hidden Cove residents have come before the city to do this act that they're asking of council and of the Planning and Zoning Board to make a recommendation where not all of the units have the equal ability to have that third-story balcony, where some have gotten permits to do so. It's now inconsistent across the board. There's 36 or so units, I think that it was said, and 32, sorry. And in order to allow each of them to have the ability to develop equally, this ordinance is something that staff created in response to the request that council gave advisability for staff to draft this ordinance. So staff is recommending that you approve this, and if there's any recommendations about distances or the depth of the balconies that you would like to recommend, that would be something that you could discuss at this time.
Thank you. I do have a question here, though. I don't know too much about add-ons, okay, like this, to an already existing building, okay? So I'm assuming that the structures that have been put in place now, would they have to be brought up to code? I mean, I don't know if they, I'm assuming that they receive permits to do this.
Any addition would require a building permit, and we would look at it for zoning.
Okay, so would it be individual? In other words, each homeowner would have to come to you individually?
Each individual property owner would submit a request for a permit if they so wanted to do that. There would not be a blanket permit for all property owners, no.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the commission? Any questions of staff?
So as I understand, based upon the Segrin property, clearly someone would not be able to put an add-on projection because it would clearly violate Section 30-63, the shoreline protection setback. Is that correct?
Without looking at a survey of those townhome lots, I can't say for sure, but it would appear, based on the area I look at, I think it would be a very challenging to add something on there.
Well,
and-
they're within 5 feet of the water
Okay.
in lots of places.
I would say
So
no.
I don't see that.
Yeah.
I think that the owner of those lots would have to get a variance to 30-63, and that would be their burden to overcome.
And secondly, you've worded this within any townhouse development. So if I have a condominium, I do not enjoy the same benefit.
That's correct.
Adjacent to the Indian River. So this ordinance is just specific to one piece of property, which is highly unusual from a city standpoint. So, and do we know on Mrs. Taylor's situation whether or not she could secure a permit if this was granted as to whether or not Section 30-63 would create a problem? Do we know one way or the other?
The
Maybe she knows. I don't know.
I'm 30 feet from the river.
Well, you could have a 5-foot addition then, not an 8-foot addition, because it has to be at least 25 feet by the shoreline protection setback. I don't want this to be an exercise in futility is why I'm asking the question.
I would say based on aerials I'm looking at, because I don't have a survey that shows the actual distance between the rear of her property to the mean high water line. She says she is 30 feet from the water. I'm not sure if that means from the mean high water line at the edge of the actual water or from the improvement. It looks like that there is a revetment that's on the edge of the property, of the development itself. So I think she's going to have to submit a survey that shows maybe that distance to make sure she's not encroaching to that rear. Obviously, if there is an issue on her particular case, then yes, she would probably have to reduce the size of her new addition she's requesting to 5 feet. But I think we looked at this before when she added the porch, and I don't think we found an issue in her particular case one. So I think she's saying 30 feet, but I think it may be deeper than that based on what I'm seeing on an aerial. We can certainly verify that.
Any more questions from Commission?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
So would this cover all of the homes in this community, this regulation, this change, or just the ones that are truly on the river?
It also says common area.
Right. but
So
that
to include all of
That
them.
goes to Member Seaver's comment that if it is also, if it's the Indian River or a common area, then I think we have other townhome communities probably within the city that would claim they open out onto a common area and would want the same ability to add on to their units.
When we did our analysis, we found only these two cases to fitting all criteria. So I
But
think
this
what
says-
you're saying, either or?
This says major body of water or
Okay.
a
And we're
common
looking at,
area.
on page 19 of the ordinance.
Well, right now I'm on page 14 of the packet.
Well, that's the staff report, which is not the binding language of the code. The staff report does use that language that is not consistent with the ordinance. The ordinance
The
does.
ordinance doesn't say common area, I don't think.
It does,
says
yeah, on
Adjacent
page-
to the Indian River Lagoon.
On page 19 of your packet, you'll see in that red underlined language, adjacent to a major water body or common area. So if we are in error at not finding all the properties that may be impacted this, we can certainly go back and do a more in-depth analysis, but that was our initial finding.
The development itself needs to be adjacent to the river in the first part of that section.
So that's just the development that,
The development needs to be
river is talking
adjacent,
about.
and then the house needs to be either the water or the common area adjacent to. So the staff attempted to narrowly tailor this as specifically as possible to the affected properties that made the request before council.
so my next question is, if this is approved, what then stops the enclosure of this balcony? As they've already enclosed the balcony they had, is there anything that stops the enclosure of the new balcony?
In the parentheses in that same paragraph, it says excluding screen rooms or other enclosures. So it's specific to elevated decks or balconies. So this would prevent them from further enclosing it into a living space again, and then adding another balcony later on.
Okay. And then, would there be any regulation on the third floor one on what the floors would have to be? Like, would it have to be something that rain could go through to go down, or could that be?
No, man, there's nothing in here that
Okay.
specifies how that should
All
be.
right. Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Do we have a motion on this? Anyone? We don't
This is
have a motion.
confusing. It's confusing, I don't know what to do with it.
We don't have a motion on this, so, and I've heard,
So I'll make a motion. Make a motion to table this item to the next meeting because we've received a lot of new additional information. I think there's some things that staff needs to look into further. So table to the next meeting, my motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion is tabled to the next meeting.
Sir, can we do a roll
Do we
call?
need do we need a roll call on table? Okay, roll call, please.
Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Baker?
Yes.
Member Severs?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Member Taylor? Sorry.
Motion is tabled.
Okay, so the next item before you tonight is another ordinance. This is item number 9C. This is page 22 of your packet. And this is related to screen porches. This is to correct an issue we discovered in the code. Page 23 of your packet starts with the first title page of the ordinance. We've included section 28-342 accessory use table on page 24 of your packet. This comes from the code. Basically, a few years ago, if you remember, we restructured the entire code to make it a little more efficient in being able to find information and make it more consistent. And to be able to answer people's questions as to what they can and can't do in their property. We came up with a table format with allowable uses per zoning district. So you'll see in this table on page 24 of your packet, we've got red line strike through language here called for attached screen porches. These, and it was originally listed as L. That key inside our code says L means it's permitted, but with certain conditions. Well, there are no conditions with a attached screen porch. It just has to meet the setback requirements, that's all. So we're correcting that to say P, which is an outright permitted use under those zoning districts. That's what we threw in there on page 24 of your packet. And I'll refer you to page 26 of your packet, and we've made that correction there as well. Again, you'll see page 26 of your packet, attached screen porch is a permitted use as long as, of course, it meets setback requirements for an attached screen porch for an accessory use. There are no other conditions or other standards there like you see in subparagraph C. So that's why we're clarifying this to change it from L to P. With that, I'll try and answer any questions you have about this. This is basically just a cleanup ordinance from when we restructured the code a few years ago. That's all I had. I'll try and answer your questions.
Any questions, staff?
There's no cards on this item.
Thank you.
I think she wants you to open the public hearing.
Any comment from the public? Open, close? No comment. No cards. Staff?
Make a motion for approval.
Second.
All those in favor? Oh, you want a roll call? Roll call, please.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes?
Member Baker?
Yes.
Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Member Severs?
Here. Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Okay, the next item on your agenda starts on page 28 of your packet. It's an ordinance related to the height overlay, which is a new ordinance we're introducing here. This was also based on an advisability or direction from City Council for us to draft. I have exhibits which I'd like to pass out to you before I start to give you some background about this.
Mr. Chairman, could I find out, do we have any cards on this item?
Yes, sir.
We do.
We
Okay.
have one.
No problem. I'll just pass these out to you, and then I'll go ahead and give a description of it. Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Chelsea. Okay. Chelsea's going to pass them out to you. There are two exhibits that were specifically requested by City Council members at a height workshop that was conducted a couple months ago. And they asked for information about height in the city, and so we provided this information to them at their request. This ordinance is basically will allow additional height in certain areas of the city, additional height of buildings in certain areas of the city, and we propose limiting this overlay, this additional height in certain areas based on input we received in this past few years as part of some planning studies that we did and some recommendations from our comprehensive plan consultant. I'll elaborate in a moment. So on August 7th of this year, City Council conducted a workshop to receive public input regarding increased building heights. And based on positive input and subsequent council discussion, staff developed the attached ordinance creating a height overlay. The ordinance proposes an overlay area east of US 1 north of Buffalo Road to the city limits and south of Cheney Highway to the city limits, excluding the area adjacent to River Edge Drive, which is a local road. A map of the area is included in the ordinance. And I'm going to refer you to page 32 of your packet, and you'll see a height overlay map that we've attached to this ordinance. And you'll see the areas that are shaded in purple are the areas that would be impacted by this ordinance. So those areas in purple would be allowed to have additional height provided they meet certain conditions. We did not include the area of the downtown, which already has a very high height allowance, and the area between Cheney Highway and the downtown. And the reason why we didn't include the area between Cheney and the downtown was because, for two reasons. There in 2007, there was a US 1 corridor master plan that was developed and approved, and it included recommendations that the height east of US 1 should be no higher than 35 feet. There was no action approved based on that. It was a recommendation based on public input. And then last year, or this year rather, our consultant with the vision-based comprehensive plan recommended in the gateway land use that we described to you earlier tonight, a maximum height of 4 stories, not an actual number of feet. So staff did not feel comfortable coming up with a height in this area. Obviously, this is something that you could weigh in on and maybe suggest if you'd like to see additional height where you think it's more appropriate in this area between Cheney and the downtown. I'm going to flip back then now to the agenda cover page on page 28. And I apologize, I'll flip back a little bit to kind of describe what's going on here, but I'll answer any questions you may have during my presentation. So the next provision that's proposed in this ordinance is that properties abutting single-family residential uses shall be limited to no more than 35 feet higher than the abutting home. A third provision that's proposed here is multifamily and commercial properties will be limited to, are being proposed to be limited to 6 stories or 75 feet, whichever is greater. Another one is that mixed-use developments, which would be defined as being able to allow for or provide a public access along an entirety of the Indian River Lagoon, and in which the lower floor is developed for commercial use, may increase height to 10 stories or to 120 feet, whichever is greater. And finally, we're introducing a transitional height plane, which would be required for structures greater than 50 feet. And we've included a visual description of what that is, an illustration of that, and I'll try and describe what that is in a moment. So further down on page 30 of your packet starts the title of this draft ordinance. In the whereas clauses, again, we've identified how we came up with the the overlay, and why we excluded certain areas, because the staff did not feel comfortable proposing something higher than what was already recommended back in 2007 and by our consultant. So on page 31 of your packet, you'll see the conditions to allow for that maximum height in those purple areas. In condition A, or subparagraph A, under the new section 29-162, maximum building height, It says that for properties located within the area encompassed by, if you recall, the River Edge Drive Small Area Plan, that is a local road, and there's a plan that governs development on that local road, or zoning on that local road. The maximum building height shall be governed by the small area plan. In paragraph B, properties abutting a single-family residential uses shall be limited to no more than 35 feet, higher than the abutting single-family structure. In paragraph C, multifamily and commercial properties shall be limited to 6 stories or 75 feet, whichever is greater. In paragraph D, mixed use, which may include a minimum of 2 uses, such as multifamily, commercial, and hotel, which provide public access along the entirety of the Indian River Lagoon shoreline, and in which the lower floor is developed for commercial use, may increase height to 10 stories or 120 feet, whichever is greater. In buildings in which the lowest floor is parking, commercial uses, which are provided on the second floor, shall be considered to meet the mixed-use requirement. So if you meet those conditions with a new development in those areas that we're proposing to be, that are purple on that map that I just showed you, you can go up to 10 stories or 120 feet, whichever is greater. And then the next proposed section, 29-163, titled Transitional Height Plane, on the same page 31 of your packet, you'll see an illustration of what we mean by transitional height. In one of your exhibits, I'm going to point to this one here that shows heights based on zoning. What we tried to identify was the areas of the city that are governed by zoning districts that have a hard maximum height, and those that have a maximum, not a maximum height. You can go up as far as you want as long as you increase your setbacks. So I'll point to an example on this exhibit that Chelsea passed out to you. The areas there that are gray along the shore are primarily located in a zoning district called Shoreline Mixed-Use. The Shoreline Mixed-Use has a maximum height of 50 feet. However, you can go up above 50 feet provided you increase your setback. And so if you have a very large piece of property and you want to go really high, your building has to be really far away from the property line. In the ordinance that we're drafting for you tonight, we're introducing what's called a transitional height plane, and you see in the illustration here, the building closest to that adjacent property that has a single-family home, that portion of the building doesn't necessarily have to be farther away just because you're going higher. It just that the height has to stay there, and then the height of the building can go up, but the building itself doesn't have to move. That's what we're suggesting here in this transitional height. That's a different type of way of doing development than what I just explained to you in this exhibit. I hope I was clear. Okay. Yes? Okay, I didn't know that you had a question.
I have a question. Is that right?
That's all I had on the map on the next page. Again, it just shows you we're open to suggestions as to revising where these height standards can be located. I've heard some comments already from some people that maybe it should be concentrated in more areas and allowed in more areas, and maybe prohibited in other areas that we're suggesting here. So we're open to any suggestions, and I'll try and answer any questions you have about this draft.
I have a question on the gray area, SMU. I printed that out today, unless I have a wrong code that I printed from the cities. The maximum height in SMU is 50 feet. It has a note 4 and 5. Note 4 reads, an additional 1-foot setback, side yard setback, shall be required for each foot of building height above 35 feet. Unless you've changed it, I know that maximum building height is 50 feet. The additional setback is above 35 feet. So that's very important to this map because so much of the map is SMU. And I'm afraid that, check your code, I printed it out today. 28-326?
You are correct, sir. Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, you are correct. Above
right.
35 feet, up to 50 feet. That, I stand corrected.
Okay.
There was several versions of this map. I was hoping to have the latest one to give to you tonight.
okay.
So we
I
did
just
get.
want to make sure we're
yeah.
clear on that.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Have additional comments? No, sir. Any more questions from the commission?
Yeah.
Are we going to, how far along are we going to, what I'm saying is, are we going to review this again? Or is this,
The city council will need a recommendation from you. You could also recommend that it be tabled, and if council agrees with that, then it would probably come back to you. You could also ask council to, ask them to allow you to see this again. But again, that's up to city council to make that decision. Yes, sir.
Is there a specific date that anything on the west side of this one can't go over 35 feet? No, there were some over there before, you know, from back when. But I thought some of my paperwork said after a certain date, they couldn't go over 35 feet.
I'm not familiar with that.
No?
Maybe you're speaking of a development
I have to go
agreement?
paper diving again to find, no. I thought somewhere back, 5, 6, 7 years ago, when we set that mark, 35 feet on the west side, nothing on the east side. But I couldn't remember if it was a date in there that specified after this date, you know, you can't go above that.
I'll certainly ask the staff if they recall anything like that, but I'm not familiar with that. No, sir.
Okay.
are there any other questions of staff? Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Any cards?
Yes. Philip Noer.
Good evening. My name is Philip Noer. My business address is 1795 West NASA Boulevard in Melbourne, Florida. I'm not sure about what I'm about to say, how it fits into what you have in front of you, because that's just an ordinance in the abstract. I'm up here because I represent a client who is in the process of planning for a development in the area that it would be allowed going up to 120 feet. So you don't have, or I'm unaware that you have any information about that development, and I thought if you're willing, I would just take a few minutes to talk to you about what, at least from my point of view, and the time that I've been spending with your staff and the time that we've been talking to folks in the community about what we are trying to do. And to kind of condense it, I think all of you are probably familiar with Kennedy Point Park. That is closed and been closed for a while. I think you're familiar with the marina. That's suffered a lot of damage and is basically, with all due respect, perhaps an eyesore. And I think you're also familiar with the Kennedy Point condominiums. We are not doing anything with the Kennedy Point condominiums. We can't. They're individually owned. But they have certain issues that they have talked to my client about, and in that discussions, I believe that we have presented some solutions to them for the problems that they currently exist. What is planned is immediately west of the marina would be a 150-unit hotel. That unit would be specifically, that hotel is being specifically designed to not only take advantage of the beautiful view of the lagoon, but also to informally tie itself into the space program. As part of that development, the rooftop is be designed in a certain way where it can be a focal point for looking at launches. It can be a focal point for weddings or other type of celebrations in your community. And that is on top of the second floor, which would have significant banquet room and rooms where people can come together for business deals or put on programs, things of that nature. The second floor would have restaurants. The first floor would have parking. The whole length of the property that my client has by the waterway would be open to the public. As we go to our south, to the damaged park, we have been in negotiations. We have not finished those negotiations, but we're far into the negotiations as a way to get that park open, as a way for us to contribute to help as far as the opening of that park, as a way of seeing that the launch area, which is not useful right now, will become useful so that boaters in your community will have the ability to use that as a launch area, as they've had for a number of years before, but they certainly can't do it now. And in addition to that, there are issues dealing with the dredging, and we've been in discussions with the county about that, and the county appears to be willing to join with us to enlarge the dredging area. The county is starting to proceed for a small dredging area, which, at least in our opinion, will make it somewhat challenging to get the boat launched and to get the boat out into the Indian River. We are going to help them take care of that so that the dredging area will reasonably accommodate the boat launches, and will also help in doing with a breaker wall, which will then protect the whole area, which was part of the problems that the park has. So why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you this because I think, with no disrespect to the staff, but I need to put some life into what you're seeing in front of you. This is not some pie in the sky. I have the owner of the land, the owner of the marina, who has already started the application for the permits, has already started what the repairs are going to be. He is committed to this community. In fact, he is an owner of a home in this community. He has hotels throughout various parts of this state and other state, including by the Port Canaveral. He's for real. This project is for real. The only way this project makes any sense economically is if we have the height. Now, what's the difference between 75 feet and 120 feet? Well, the simple answer is it's 45 feet. But the real answer is economically, you can't put up a hotel with 75 rooms in it and do what we're trying to do. It just doesn't work. So yes, there are other heights that people can talk about, but it just won't work in our situation. Again, a lot of time has been put into this. We didn't just say, okay, we're coming in and we want to bring this project, and you just got to give us the height. There was a lot of energy and money spent in not only coming up with the height, but reaching out into your community to see if there was support, at least in that area. You all know that area better than I. I don't think you would like to point to that area as saying that is Titusville. I think this is an excellent opportunity to take an area that needs help and to give it the help, and at the same time bring economic success to the community in jobs, in facilities that your community can utilize in a very positive way. So with that, I'm here to take any questions, if there are any. Mr. Oliver is in the audience. He is the principal, and certainly he knows more about his project than I do. But we're here to tell you not only this is a good project for your community, but to take any questions that you might have that might alleviate any concerns that you might have of bringing this type of project to your area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does the commission have any questions? Mr. Severs?
For that type of project, will you have certain floors that'll be for parking?
The first floor will be for parking. I'm not sure, there may be some parking on the second, but it's going to be commercial restaurants and things of that area is what it's going to be used for, and there will be ground parking as well.
So there would the first floor be commercial and parking? Is that what you're saying? Or?
First floor is just parking. There will be no type of mixed use as far as shops or anything like that, or restaurants. That will be, you'll start seeing that on the second floor.
Question. Would this be a single building?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the maximum height again? Your microphone's on.
Yeah.
And the maximum height again?
Would be 120 feet.
120 feet.
It's 10 stories, and as our architects have done it, that would be within the 120-foot range, so.
May I approach for clarification?
Did I make a mistake?
You want the card ahead of time?
Before you leave.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And your name and address for the record.
You can show them this.
While he fills out that card, I have a question, if I can. It says that this excludes I think it says it excludes the River Edge Drive small area plan, because has a separate small area plan. What's the limit in that small plan?
I'll have to find that answer for you, but I can do that
I'm just
right now.
wondering why we've excluded one road within this.
River Edge Drive, several years ago, the community there on that local road, it's not an Ontario or Collector
I know
Road with
which
a dead
road
end,
that
came to us asking for a plan to regulate or to kind of guide what kind of zoning will go on those properties as they become annexed into the city. So during this process, they actually came to us and asked for their area to be excluded from this overlay. So it was a specific request, and so what we decided to do was to exclude that
So are there
area
other
based on their request.
small area plans within what's covered in the overlay?
No, ma'am,
That's
we
the
do
only
not
one?
have another small area plan or neighborhood plan that's covered within this area. Now, our US 1 corridor master plan, I can take a look to see how far out that goes and see if it includes any areas that we're recommending for approval here.
Okay, and the other thing I couldn't figure out, where's the top section, the northern section, where's that?
It goes from Buffalo Road
Which
all
is
the
where?
That is north of our downtown. So if you're going US 1, North Washington, past,
North of the marina?
yes, yes,
Way north, okay.
yeah.
I just couldn't figure out where that started. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. My name is Kent Oliver. I'm a principal in Oliver Companies, Inc., and Oliver Management. We own and have ownership interest and manage 21 hotels currently. I built a hotel in Cape Canaveral approximately 10 years ago. And while I was doing that, I was looking for also a place to live and call home. I purchased a home in La Cita, and since that point in time, I've been also looking for other development opportunities here in town. I looked at the marina years ago when I was developing the hotel in Cape Canaveral, but the amount of money that they're asking for it and the ability for that to pay for itself didn't pan out, so I passed. Then there's been a couple of hurricanes. This is a site that is currently distressed. The docks are currently in ruin. And I looked at this as an opportunity to redevelop an area for the city that would beautify and have an iconic entrance as you're coming in from the south side. I belong to Rotary, and through that association, I have met the councilors, city managers, other people in the community, and asked them what Titusville needs. They said, well, our most important asset is the water. And we are building trails. We have fishing contests. We have now private sector developing the Space Coast. And we don't have a conference space in this community that can really satisfy any of those needs. They also don't have a conference space that can accommodate probably more than 150 people. That's in an environment that one would like to have a wedding, do group meetings, have after parties for the Space Coast, meeting place for NASA, for other state meetings. This could be a focal point for the city. My particular project would have a conference area, restaurant, bar, local gift. We'd have separate parking with a ramp that would come over to the lobby and restaurant area. And the reason for that additional parking is if you're going to do an after party or have a 400-person conference space, you may need 400 stalls to accommodate that. So what we have underneath the building is one row of parking underneath that can accommodate approximately 75 cars. Then we would need additional parking that would be towards the condominiums and a bridge that would come across to the lobby area. And right at that location, there's a lagoon, and the manatees come in there. And so what we want to do is we want to protect the environment, have a viewing space for the manatees, have the restaurant with the glass and the windows and so on close to that. And that's our plan in a nutshell. So we want to accommodate the city, the county, and the local businesses with a facility that will help meet those needs.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Do I have a recommendation or a motion on this? Any further discussion? Mr. Seaver?
Yes, sir. In reality, the property to the north that is included, Buffalo Road North, I'm quite familiar with all of that, is primarily wetlands. And the likelihood of development and adjacent to the railroad track, et cetera, I think the likelihood of development of that tract or properties is remote. The development at the south end, we'll be talking about a little bit later, but they already have a developer's agreement and they can do basically what they want to do. So in reality, this ordinance is designed around one parcel, this gentleman's parcel, which I have trouble with taking one little blip on the city map and giving special treatment to. And if I was going to consider it, I would include probably the old Howard Johnson's property because that makes sense in the event it was ever redeveloped. And some development might be, but as we know, the current regulation is 50 feet. And the city of Titusville had a long, hard years reducing SMU to 50 feet. And we had Bert Harris claims, we had all kinds of things. So I myself am personally is not necessarily opposed to additional height, but the building that's there, Kennedy Point, which I'm very familiar with as well, is 60 feet in height according to this map that I have. I personally would not have problem going up to maybe a maximum of 80 feet, but I think 120 feet is out of character, is a blip here or there. I do think if you're going to allow taller buildings, they should be geographically together and not just one stuck out along the road. So I don't personally have a problem with having some additional height. Certainly I don't have a problem with saying at least 6 floors residential and mixed use, and the floor for parking may or may not count, but you could have a number of floors with a maximum. My suggestion is 80 feet. How that fits in with what we've heard, I'm not sure, but having a 60-foot building next to a 120-foot building, and those two buildings alone there, I personally don't think is good planning. It doesn't look right. I believe the planning staff, when they conducted their Titusville Tomorrow hearings, got an earful about Harbortown and the blip that it shows and creates. And I don't think we ought to go down the road of creating another one of those. But some additional height to accommodate what the gentleman wants, I don't have a problem with that. How that can be structured, I'd look back to staff to do that. But in reality, we're really talking about one piece of property on this map, because you can do all you want to do already in the south end, and then the north end doesn't really mean much.
If I may, just to answer Noah Copeland's question, in the US 1 corridor master plan, the study area did include Kennedy Point property as well in the plan itself.
area?
Not the small area plan. You asked about if any other plans could be impacted or were underneath this overlay area that we're proposing. And yes, the study area that was included as part of the US 1 corridor master plan did include this parcel too. So it stretched from here all the way up to the downtown.
Which was a height limit of what?
It recommended a height limit of 35 feet east of US 1 on certain areas. And so there is generally that entire area. But it also included some provisions for additional height with some programming. But none of that was adopted. The study itself was adopted, but the recommendations out of it for any changes to the code or any kind of programming where it's not adopted. It was basically a recommendation.
Are there any questions of staff? Member Baker?
I have comments also. I really enjoyed listening to what you had to say, and Mr. Oliver, and would love to have exactly what you're talking about as long as it's on the west side of US 1. Every time we have one of these really large buildings go in, it is quite the uproar in Titusville. Only the people that are profiting from it in some way like it, and no one else does. And I think it would be a wonderful thing on the west side. And quite honestly, I think Mr. Severs is very generous with his allotments. I really feel like 50 feet is more than enough on the riverside, and 35 would be really where we should be.
Do we have a motion on this?
First, close the public hearing.
Okay. Open to the public, closed to the public. What's the commission's desire on this? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to deny ordinance 50, 2018, the height overlay.
Is there a second?
Hold up a minute.
I'll second.
We have a second. Roll call, please.
Member Noel Copeland,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir,
This is a tough one, because that area does need improvement. But I'm afraid, this is my take on this, if we start this and we go to this height, I don't think there'll be any stopping it, quite frankly. And that's my concern, so I'll have to say no.
Sir, a no vote is approving the ordinance. This is a motion to deny.
I'm sorry. Yes, to deny. To deny. So I'm going.
Member Baker,
Deny.
Secretary Chambers,
No.
Sir, a no vote is approval of the ordinance. Is that what you're intending?
What was that again now?
The motion is to deny. Do you want to?
Deny, yeah.
he said yes.
Wishes to deny.
Okay, thank you. Member Severs,
Yes, to deny. I'm certainly willing to entertain a modification to. But as stated, that would be my position.
Your comments will be presented to council.
Okay.
The next agenda item before you was not required for advertisement, so that concludes all the advertised agenda items. This one is a sketch plat. It's item number 9E. And this is a sketch plat for the Antigua Bay. It's called Phase 1 Development. And I will skip around just a little bit because I'll refer you to the exhibits. And we actually have hard copies of the exhibits if you like as well. We'll pass those out for you, unless some of you may already have them. This starts, I'm sorry, on page 35 of your packet.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question first.
Okay, so this item.
I have a question
Yes, sir.
first. In looking at this, and thank you for providing the sketch plat, the required submittals, it provides under 11.1.2, name of the proposed development, name and address of the developer, name of the owner, architect, landscape architect, surveyor, engineer. I do not see any of that information. Did someone submit an application? If so, I would like to know who the name of the owner is, or the applicant. And the reason why I ask that, there's been a transfer in title of this property from the developer's agreement to today.
I would say take a look at page, it's a large plan, page 42 of your packet. It's on the cover page of the sketch plat, in the top left. And there is a titled Development Team, owner, Graham Allen, civil engineer, Jake Wise. There's also the name for the landscape architect, surveyor. Let's see. Those are the main points of contact for this application.
Who's the owner?
It says his name is Graham Allen. Company is Waterfront Company Investment Fund 1. And that is true. That was consistent, I believe, with the development agreement.
Well, according to the public records, in April, the property was transferred to someone else. Has the city consented to an assignment of the developer's agreement?
I'm not familiar with that, so I will not be able to.
I mean, I can provide you with a copy of the public record, but, and part of my concern is that we need to make sure who the applicant is per the code, and we need to make sure that this property, this entire property, is really owned by two owners.
Yes.
And a lot of this water lines, sewer lines, the lift station, et cetera, are on the second owner's property, not Antigua Bay. So I'm not sure procedurally we even have a proper application at this stage. That's why I'm raising the question. On April the 12th, the deed was recorded transferring from Waterfront Co-Investment Fund to Antigua Bay Developers, LLC. According to the Brevard County Property Appraiser's Office. At 4 o'clock, it suddenly hit me, I ought to look at that. So I did. I know we have the applicant's representative. Maybe he can answer this question, but procedurally, I want to make sure we're even procedurally considering a proper application from the owner, which does not appear to be Waterfront.
I see the recorded deed that Member Severs is speaking of.
And according to the developer's agreement, they have to get the consent of the city council for the assignment of the agreement. So my question for staff, do we have a proper application per the code?
On page 37 of your packet, we included the procedures for a sketch plat for your understanding.
Yes, sir.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you. So the applicant, on paragraph A, the applicant is required to consult with staff in his formal submittal of this, and the administrators shall determine completeness of any sketch plat submittal. Once the application has been determined to be complete, the sketch plat will be scheduled for review in accordance with the review schedule set forth in the code. And then on C, after consideration of the administrator's recommendations, the P&Z may recommend approval with conditions, or deny of the sketch plat based upon the review criteria contained in this code. I believe if it is questionable to you, then I think you have that action, that ability to make that kind of action as to maybe this should be resubmitted or clarified by the applicant. And I think they probably
I know
could
we
have an
have an
opportunity.
applicant's representative here. Maybe he can answer the question.
The attorney for the applicant is also here, and the city received an opinion of title in November 2017 after the development agreement was approved by city council. And my suggestion is that title opinion would need to be updated if in fact the title has changed.
Yeah.
And so that would be a condition requirement to proceed with this. And I would suggest that the commission invite the applicant up to address this issue.
The applicant, come on up.
Thank you. Name is Jake Wise, civil engineer for the project. Business address is 2651 West O'Galley Boulevard in Melbourne. We've been working with staff for an extended period of time for the sketch plat to come before you. When we first made application, that was the current ownership entity. It appears that wasn't updated when it was transferred in April. So if it would be acceptable by the board, we'll modify the application and make sure the correct ownership entity is on the application before it goes before council. In fact, it'll be something very simple to take care of tomorrow. Mr. Severs is absolutely correct. There are two ownership entities of the property. There has been for many years. To simplify it, basically there's an eastern portion of the site with one ownership entity and a western portion of the site with a separate entity. Our initial application included only the eastern portion, but working through with staff, they had asked us to loop a water main through the western portion. So we have the same principal in charge of both of those entities, but a slightly different ownership group. So we would be obtaining an easement prior to any construction work for that water main going through the western portion, and that's something we've worked with staff very closely with. But for the purposes of tonight's sketch plat, we simply ask if we can update that ownership entity just because of the timing of the original application versus where we are today.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I can tell you, in my opinion, the other owner also should be an applicant because, for example, the lift station is not located within Phase 1. Unfortunately, I've had very bad experience with phasing of developments, and not all the properties that service the development, and someone transfers title or there's a foreclosure, and the city ends up with having to buy the lift station. So I have a real problem with that the lift station, and I think there's other issues. And it obviously the owner of that property should consent or submit as a consent to the application.
I would agree.
Actually, if I can help clarify that as well. I'll be happy to present this as the evidence. So what you see highlighted right here, and I apologize, I'm colorblind, I don't know if that's yellow or light green or whatever color that is Phase 1, and that is the sketch plat that you have in your packet as part of the application. The lift station itself is right where I put this asterisk, so it actually is within the Phase 1 of the sketch plat. Originally, we had a lift station at a different location. That's probably what you're thinking of.
That's what I got.
There's one here to the south, and there was one up here to the north. But that has, because of the phasing plan, the lift station is within Phase 1. The only improvements, except for off-site in the right-of-way, that aren't part of Phase 1 and aren't part of the single ownership entity is what I highlighted in yellow for that water main. And that water main would require an easement from that separate ownership entity on the western portion of the site. If I turn that, north is up this way. So you got the river to the east, Phase 1 in that highlighted area. So the only item off-site is that water main, and of course, we will provide an easement, and we do have the same managing partner with both ownership entities.
If I may ask, what's being presented to you tonight, is this different from what is submitted for the agenda? Anyway, were there changes made?
None that I'm aware of.
You said the lift station was moved, or is it the same location as what we have in here?
It has always been in the same location for Phase 1.
It's just inside phase, okay. So
Yeah.
it was never moved from Phase 2 to Phase 1, or in other phases, or whatever the
Yeah.
case was.
And
All
Mr.
right.
Severs was intimately involved with earlier phases when we were doing them a long time ago. Do you want me to leave this with you? Okay.
Any other questions?
Not from a procedural standpoint.
Thank you. I'll take my crayons.
I just want to get that clarified.
What's the desire of the commission on this? Do we have a motion?
I just wanted to mention that what's being proposed to you tonight is procedurally a sketch plat. It's primarily a conceptual drawing. And this is a unique case because it has to be consistent with a previously approved master plan that was attached to a development agreement. So the layout of this has to be consistent with that. We've determined it is consistent. They are only proposing to develop what they've called Phase 1, the first 100 single-family lots along the water of Parcel 5 of that whole master development. Parcel 5, just so you know, allows for 202 single-family lots. And again, they're only proposing to develop the first 100 lots of that parcel, primarily those lots along the water. And they are also proposing right now to only develop the public spine road, as you see in the layouts there, that come from the Nassau Causeway or Columbia Boulevard going north. And so that area on page 44 of your packet, it's called Overall Master Plan Development Plan, or excuse me, Overall Master Development Plan. It's the title of the sheet. And it's got everything shaded in two colors, green or beige. That beige area is what they're proposing to develop now as a subdivision. Page 44 of your packet, you'll see it's a large slide, a large sheet. Yes, yes. It didn't print out correctly, did it? Well, you should be able to see it on the computer then on the agenda. It does come out clearly there. I apologize. And you will also see that they are incorporating the required 50-foot building setback from the water for each of these lots.
So just the houses, not the recreation area or anything other than 100 houses?
Correct. There is an area there called private recreation area. I'll have to leave it to the applicant to describe exactly what that will be. But that's included in the beige or shaded area that they're proposing to be the subdivision.
It appears to be.
I'm sorry?
It appears to be in the beige.
Yeah, yeah. They are not proposing to put in a second road yet, second access. The code allows this up to 100 lots. And the fire department is okay with this because they are going, well, they have to confirm, but they are proposing to sprinkle each of these buildings. And I'll ask the applicant to confirm that.
So a couple of items I heard you mention earlier. The first about the fire marshal, we've worked closely with them. We have agreed to sprinkle each of the individual houses as part of the overall master plan. That's part of the developer's agreement that will be done. And then as soon as we go to the 101st lot, we will provide a secondary access point out to US 1. And on that sheet I just highlighted where I showed the water main, that's actually the same route as the road would be. So prior to the 101st lot. There's also a requirement in the developer's agreement by the time of the 50th CO, so half of phase 1, we have to provide some of the recreational elements. So while we don't have a proposed specific design for that at this time, we understand that we can't get a 51st CO until that recreational element is there. So that's all part of the overall phasing and the developer's agreement that's been part of it. Everything in the sketch plat, as staff described, is preliminary nature. We do have complete construction drawings that staff has approved, with the only exception being that water main loop, because that was something that was added later in the process. But we have gone to complete full construction drawings that have otherwise been approved by staff. Everything you're looking at tonight is in compliance and agreement with that developer's agreement.
When you say you've agreed to sprinkle the first 100 homes, do you mean install sprinklers in them?
An automated sprinkler system inside every single family home, which is, I've engineered thousands and thousands of single family homes, first time I've ever seen it.
And is that like a monitored system at all, or it's just an installed automatic heat-sensitive sprinkler system?
You are way past my pay grade. I don't know what the specifics are. It's something that the fire sprinkler contractor that we're working with and the fire marshal agreed upon, but I'm really good outside the buildings. I'm not good inside.
And you said after the 50th occupancy, then you'd do the public spaces, right?
Some of the public, yeah. There's multiple public spaces across this 345-acre master plan development, but for the single-family portion of it, which is what you're looking at today, prior to that 51st CO, we are going to be installing some of the recreational elements as the developer's agreement was agreed upon.
And do you have to complete the 50th house by a certain amount of time?
It's market-driven, so hopefully it goes fast.
But it could go slow.
It's been very slow. I've been working on this project for 15 years, and we haven't broken ground yet.
Okay.
So we were very excited to be at the point where we can finally move forward.
So it's possible that 20 houses get built in there, but none of the other stuff gets developed?
Yeah, and it's part of the notification to each buyer of that as well. They'll understand that you don't have the recreational elements go in before the first house has a CO. And that's not unusual for any developments we do. We typically don't put in all of the recreational elements prior to the first CO, just because of the phasing of construction costs and things like that. It also is important to kind of see what the market demand is for the development. If it's becoming a lot more families or a lot more snowbirds, sometimes we adjust what the recreational elements will be. So that's why it's not committed to at the front end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To Member Noel Copeland's point, if you look on page 10 of the agreement, the bottom 3 lines answer your question about the fire sprinkler system. The developer agrees to mitigation in the form of increased side setbacks or installation of fire sprinkler systems. So that means they have the option in this agreement to either separate the houses further than what was proposed, or to do the sprinkler systems that would be approved by the fire chief according to the National Fire Code. And so he would refer to the NFPA standards, and I presume that the fire sprinkler would automatically start, and that would be the purpose of it, to prevent that fire from spreading before the fire department could reach that location. And the reason that the fire department is concerned about fire safety is because of the distance from these homes to the nearest fire station and the response time that would be required to get public service into that neighborhood.
But does, I haven't read the whole thing because you just pointed me to it, but does this talk about the first 100 houses? Or
It
does
says,
this talk
it's about the entire development, and it's not just those 50 that would get the sprinkles. And so throughout the development, on that last paragraph on the bottom of page 10,
I think that's a separate issue about a new fire station.
Yeah, I think I can clarify that some more for you, and maybe I misunderstood your question earlier, so I apologize. Every single-family house that is part of this development would have, it is an automated fire sprinkler system where the heads are up there and it has a smoke sensor, and it will automatically function that way, and that is throughout the entire project for the single family. Almost every multifamily project we do nowadays also has an automated fire sprinkler system. That's part of the Florida Building Code, from what I understand. We also did commit to providing a 1-acre site with stormwater treatment. We've already done a preliminary design that the fire marshal was happy with for the project site. They don't at this time, they're not ready at this time to build that fire station, but it is set aside and also part of the agreement that that would be provided to them. Sorry, I didn't realize we were going to delve so deep into the developer's agreement.
Any other questions?
May I just clarify real quick? So you still are donating that property for a fire station
That's correct.
at a
yeah.
later date?
At a later date, yeah.
Okay,
And we've already
thank you.
actually worked with the Department of Transportation on access to it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Sears?
I had a few more questions. It appears from my reading of the requirements, as well as you're only wanting to do first phase, that in accordance with the agreement, it is necessary to include other lands as a part of phase one, just for the very reason you've already stated. Whenever you do 50% of COs, then you have to do, for example, the one park that's right next to it. You have to install sidewalks in accordance with section 8.3. You have to install the boardwalk, which is 5.3.2. You have to transfer the fire station in accordance with 3.6.81. If those are not a part of phase one and the property is transferred, this agreement expires within 5 years, then if the city tries to enforce that and property has been sold off or transferred and not a part of phase one, which is a part of the plat, then it's very difficult to enforce. I gave you the example of the lift station off-site. These are all outside of phase one. So in my opinion, these particular sections likewise need to be a part of phase one, because when you do 50% of the COs, you have to perform these functions. And unless they're tied together, and unfortunately, I've seen defaults and agreements and seen where one phase was constructed and the next phase wasn't, and there was transfers of property voluntarily or for foreclosure. And I've had to enforce agreements in that kind of situation. And unless they're tied together, the city is out of luck, so to speak. You really are. And I think we have a duty as well to the owners of phase one to protect their interest. And so I don't think the application is sufficient because you don't show those as a part of the phase. In addition, I have a concern about the stormwater. I tried very difficult to figure out where all the lines were and the like, but one of the requirements is the discharge has to be into a, and I'll find the wording of a discharge into a legal the point of discharge, legal positive outfall. And the best I can tell, you have a discharge into Addison Canal. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you have an easement for Addison Canal across the properties through for example, Mr. Ackley's property? Because Addison Canal goes right through the other properties. Do you have an easement across those properties to make that discharge?
This project is like hundreds of other projects we've had where we discharge into a water body that does go onto an adjacent property, and we've never had to get off-site easements for that type of discharge. We already have our St. Johns River Water Management District approval, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers approval, and the city staff approval of it as designed. We do discharge to Addison Creek rather than directly to the Indian River.
Which certainly is desirable to do. But my concern is, because I'm aware of litigation where if you increase the discharge into someone else's property, then there can be liability.
Correct. So we're required by statute, both city code and state statute, to either equal or reduce the amount of discharge in the post-development versus the pre-development. So we've met that standard, and we have only improved that situation for any downstream owners.
Okay. Does staff have that information? Because it is something that's required in the documents to show where the legal positive discharge is, and is staff satisfied with that?
Yes, the applicant, so you're stating that the legal positive outfall is identified?
It's not identified on the drawing. I can see where a pipe runs.
Yeah, it's on the construction drawings, and staff did approve that to the city engineer, of course. It was part of that review. And the legal positive outfall, we chose Addison Creek instead of the Indian River, which actually limited even further the amount of discharge we were allowed. But we did that because there's seagrasses in the lagoon that we did not want to disturb. And also the creek is the best natural filter there is, along with wetlands and things like that, for anything that is a discharge. But it is fully treated for a 25-year plus storm event. A 25-year storm event is 9.5 inches of rain in 24 hours. All of that is collected, treated, and then slowly outletted into the Addison Creek at a reduced rate to what current conditions have. Current conditions include a broken down old US 1 railroad tracks. All of that's being removed. Right now, that discharges directly into the Indian River and directly into Addison Creek. So these improvements will be substantially better once the stormwater management system is constructed and, again, is permitted.
Well, the reason why I asked the question is because under 11.1 of the sketch plan requirements, that is required to be shown. Identified, it's not. From the drawings that I received, okay? It is simply not. One other thing, I had asked staff for whether there was a topo of the property. One of my major concerns, and I can show you pictures. Well, let me back up. What is the size of these lots? Size of the lots? Because I don't see it on the documents we have, and that likewise is a requirement.
They vary in size. They are identified, I believe, on the SK1 cover sheet, the same sheet that has all the ownership entity and different part of the project team that's involved, all of the permits. That's on SK1. It identifies the lot sizes as 70 by 135 and 70 foot by 125 foot. The ones along the river are the deeper lots. The ones that are not along the river are the less deep lots.
The river lots, I note on the drawing there's a 50-foot, I think, setback. Is that an easement, a conservation easement? Do the property owners own to the high water line, or where does the ownership begin and end?
Yeah, they own to the upland, safe upland line as defined by state statute. There's a 50-foot building setback requirement that we agreed to, and there's a 25-foot preservation buffer as well. They do have the legal right to possibly put in, instead of a dock because of the shallowness of the river and the seagrass, as I mentioned earlier, a viewing pier. So they do have the ability through the state and federal permits to potentially put in a viewing pier. But it's not allowed to have a boat lift. It's not allowed to have anything more than a kayak or a canoe or something like that.
Is that preservation easement, is that shown on the? I couldn't see, it wasn't in the documents that I could read or see.
The 50-foot building setback was part of the requirement by code, and that is shown on SK2.
I
in your
see
packet.
that.
Yeah. The 25-foot preservation buffer is also shown with a dashed line down the middle of it. On SK2 as well.
So a homeowner could not clear everything all the way down to the water's edge because of the preservation?
That's correct, the 25-foot preservation buffer.
Okay.
And that's part of the reason you don't see the boardwalk in that area. The boardwalk is along the mixed use and commercial to the south. And it's also defined in the developer's agreement as an upland boardwalk for that very reason. We don't want to do anything to disturb the lagoon.
Okay. The upland, you were present whenever we were discussing Titusville tomorrow, the new comprehensive plan, which shows running along the water's edge here, a boardwalk.
I didn't hear that part of the presentation, sorry.
Well,
There was a recommendation from our consultant when they first came in, and that was actually during when they were negotiating, parallel when Antigua Bay was negotiating with us on a development agreement. But one of the suggestions from the consultant as a result of the workshops that happened last year was to consider encouraging the Antigua Bay developers to reorient the single-family lots away from the water, make the water line or a road, like a scenic road through the development, and then have the single-family homes on the west side of that road. And the reason that the consultant was suggesting that was to preserve an open area or a linear park as for the public use or even for this development's use, and consistent with other types of developments that have been able to preserve those areas, as opposed to subdividing the entire property along the water. That was suggested by the consultant during our visioning exercises. I don't know if the applicants for the development agreement at that time caught that or were told about it or were informed or participated in that. But that was a suggestion by the consultant at that time. And because of the development agreement that is in place right now, that would not happen unless they decided to come back and amend their development agreement, or if it expired, that might be an opportunity to negotiate that.
So, like I said, I've been part of this project for 15 years. That's the first time I've heard of that suggestion. And this developer's agreement actually did a complete 180 from the original developer's agreement. Originally, all of the multifamily and mixed-use development was along the river. It was actually the suggestion of council at that time that they would prefer us to switch it and put the single family along the water and move the multifamily to the interior portion of the site. So that's exactly what we did, and that's what is in the currently approved developer's agreement as the staff just identified. So we've been spending all these years working as closely as we can with staff and with city council's wishes, and still having, of course, a marketable project. And as I mentioned before, this sketch plat and then the preliminary plat is the final step. We have the construction drawings ready to go. We have a contractor on board. We are so excited to try to start this project during this current market, which of course is doing well. And not only that, we're really hoping with the 50th anniversary of the Moonwalk coming up in July of next year to make that a big part of the celebration of this project moving forward. So that's why we're here before you with this timing, and we'll correct the applicant item that was brought up earlier as far as the ownership entity, just timing of when we first submitted and started these conversations versus the change. But we're really hoping to move forward and go before council with any corrections that need to be made.
From an environmental question, I appreciate the fact, because I didn't see it in the documents, the 25-foot preservation. Have you considered, or would you be willing to consider that in the rear lots behind the residences, that there not be any grass planted?
If you've been out on the site, it has a very tall bluff, about 10 feet in the air, steep slope. It has heavily treed, so there's really not an opportunity to do that. But within that 25-foot area, there's really no opportunity to even plant grass or sod or anything like that. It's just the natural conditions that are out there.
Well, you can drive down Indian River Avenue as Riverside Drive and see all the nice St. Augustine grass going all the way down to the river.
Yeah, we can't
I would hate to see on a new project of this size and magnitude of approximately 60 houses that the city end up with, even if there's the 25-foot preservation, all this nice St. Augustine grass behind the houses, and the fertilizers are all running right down into the river, which has been identified as a major problem.
Yeah, we've accommodated for that at 100%, exact same concern. We have a swale system that runs on the western side of that 25-foot preservation buffer that would collect any runoff to stop it from being able to go to it. It's then diverted both north and south to a piped stormwater collection system that takes it to the on-site stormwater treatment system. So there won't be a drop of water off of the yards that go that way, and the lots are graded to drain away from the river, even on top of that swale being there. So we've done every protection we possibly can. It's part of our construction drawings the staff has. It's part of our water management district approval as well. It's not required. It's something that we went the extra mile to make sure that protection's there.
So you would not have a problem with stipulating that there would be no grass in the rear yards? Is that right?
25-foot buffer, correct.
Within the 25-foot, is the 50-foot setback, I'm talking about the 50 feet is what I'm talking about.
50 foot is a building setback.
I
We still
understand
can
that.
have a yard, a pool, something like that past the.
I'm just
50
talking
foot.
about grass at the moment.
Right, that's why the swale's there. It's within that 50 feet. So that we can't have a drop of water run off into the river, plus the 25-foot buffer. And again, it's above and beyond anything required. It was something that we did voluntarily.
Well, I think it would be helpful for the commission if we could see some of those kinds of drawings, because we have no information like that. And I think this is the time we need to speak up and let you know what some of our concerns are, rather than just at the preliminary plat stage as such.
Yeah, so the sketch plat process provides less level of detail than that, but that's why we have the construction drawings, the St. John's permit, and all the other permits that I mentioned earlier. So that level of detail is at the city staff, but it's not required as part of the sketch plat process. But certainly, we've accommodated all of that, and that's been told to us loud and clear over the 15 years that we've been working with the city.
Well, like I said, we haven't seen it. The last item I'd like to address, and I appreciate the fact that these single-family residences will have a sprinkler system. My concern as well is that if there's a fire in the woods and there's no secondary access, the old regulation before it's been changed, and I'm not sure why it was changed from a 50 to 100, because I know the former fire chief, Mr. Bogle, constantly was insisting upon secondary accesses.
So we've accommodated that as well.
Do you have, what has occurred in the past on occasion is a stabilized secondary access? Would you be willing to accommodate that?
We already have. So this water loop here will have a stabilized access for secondary access because of not only the construction of it, but also any maintenance. It'll be a city main. So we have that. We've even gone further to agree that in these open space areas, 11A and 11B on SK2 of your exhibits, those will actually be paved instead of just stabilized for that exact reason, to allow for emergency management to be able to get through those areas just in case of exactly what you described.
Okay.
So we've worked through those level of details as well.
Okay.
while you got that in your hand,
Mm-hmm.
what's in that, what's in that, where it says open space?
So that, everything you see, and again, if I'm colorblind, so I apologize, in the, what I would call a shade hatch here, and down through here, and up through here, that is all preservation space. It's open space, it's preserved. We have a public park that's passive. We have lakes, we have wetland buffers. We have an area here that allows for animals to connect between the open spaces, the preservation of Addison Creek. Almost, if I remember right, and again, I didn't know we're delving so deep into the developers agreement tonight, approximately about 50% of the project site is either preservation or passive or active recreation space.
So that open space is woods?
It'll be wooded, but it'll also have paved emergency access and pedestrian trails through it as well.
What do you mean, like walking paths or something?
Yep, and wheelchair accessible, and again, emergency services could utilize it if necessary.
Okay.
Any other questions from the commission? I tell you, as we move along, it sounds like a good project, and I realize that we're here just to do, approve the sketch plat for the first phase, and that's our job this evening. I appreciate all the additional information, and I'm sure that we'll be seeing you again going
hope so.
forward with this.
Yeah, we're excited for this first phase, hopefully to be able to move forward, and greatly appreciate the level of details that you guys are asking about, because it is important for the safety of these future residents.
Wanted you to know that after, if this is approved and goes to city council, their next step in the process would be for them to submit to us a preliminary plat, which is essentially an engineered site plan. That's an administrative approval process. This would not come back to you unless they come back with sketch plats for additional phases of this development.
What's the desire of the commission? Do I have a motion on this?
One question, actually, for the applicant, based on what they told me. Just for clarification. And I may have missed this, and maybe I just forgot. The 25-foot preservation buffer you mentioned, is that in the development agreement or on the master plan? I mean, I didn't see it identified on this plan.
We're delving deep into the developers agreement again.
But that's in the,
It's
I
on
know
the
there's a
St. John's
50-foot,
permit.
that's part of St. John's requirement.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So it could be, the 50-foot building setback is part of the developers agreement.
That's our code, correct.
Yeah, the 25-foot natural buffer is part of our St. John's permit. I just
Understood.
don't recall if it's in the
Okay.
developers agreement or not. I apologize.
I don't recall that. That's why I asked. So if that's a condition of your St. John's permit, okay, that answers my question.
Okay.
Then my second question has to do with, there are swales in the rear of the property.
The rear of the lots that back up to the river, correct?
So are there going to be easements over those? Those are going to be drainage easements on each of those lots?
I don't recall specifically if there's an easement or not, but it's part of the St. John's and city required stormwater management system.
Okay, if, in that case, typically you would have some kind of drainage easement, utility easement over that so that the property owners would not be able to impact those swales.
Correct, yeah. They're not able to impact them. I just don't recall off the top of my head
If that's what
if
you're
that
going to
was an
propose
easement
later.
or not.
Okay.
Do I have a motion on this from the commission? Mr. Severs?
I would make a motion that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of Phase 1 of the sketch plat as requested by Antigua Bay with the following conditions. Number one, that a traffic study be undertaken prior to the issuance of any permits and compliance with that as far as necessary improvements within the DOT right-of-way as such. Number two, that the drawings reflect the positive outfall for the storm drainage system. Number three, that the drawings reflect approval of a 25-foot preservation natural buffer along the shoreline. Next number, that there be a swale along the rear property lines of the properties along the Indian River, so that drainage be away from and not directly into the river. Next condition, that the private recreation area, as reflected in section 5.4 in the developer's agreement, be included as a part of phase 1. That the sidewalk requirements as it relates to this parcel and the requirements be met that are reflected in section 8.2 of the developer's agreement and 8.3. That the boardwalk requirement be included in this approval as reflected in section 5.3.2. That the requirements relating to the transfer of the fire station site as required in the developer's agreement in 3.6.8.1 subsection E be included. Next item would be that the applicant and the request be signed by all owners affected and the new owner, apparently. And the next item be that all off-site required easements for the water and sewer lines be required to be obtained as a part of approval of the sketch plat. And I think that includes all the items I have listed concerns about.
Second.
I have a question for staff. Should we vote on this with Mr. Seaver's recommendations, or do we have to go through those separately? Or can we just say including the
Those recommendations are comprehensive in the motion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any further comments?
I'm sorry, just for clarification for Lori as well. Steve, do you have those conditions written out? Your microphone's not on. I'll wear an earpiece next time. Or maybe I can just go through them real quick just to make sure I've got everything and that we understand the motion.
I don't have them separately written out,
Okay.
but I have them written down here.
Well, let me, so the first one is traffic study. I've confirmed with the engineer that he would require a traffic study with the site plan. The second one, the drawings include legal positive outfall. That certainly we can include there. The third, include a 25-foot natural buffer, preservation buffer as part of on the sketch plat, or to be identified on the site plan.
I just want to make sure it's a requirement. And I don't see it on these drawings.
I understand. So it should be identified, basically, is what you're asking.
More clearly, yeah.
Okay. Right. The other one is that swales be located away from the river? Is that what?
No, so as to drain away from the river.
Excuse me.
That's-
Okay.
I used his words.
Yep.
The fifth one is the private recreation area. Now, are you talking about parcel 6B, or are you talking about where the future clubhouse is going?
I'm talking about the,
Because there was a, go ahead, I'm sorry.
it's this one right here.
Yes, that's
That one
parcel
right there.
6B, yeah.
Because when 50% of these COs, then that's supposed to be done.
The agreement says on that one that that park will be completed at 50% of the parcel 5. So there are 202 single-family residential units planned for parcel 5, but they are only proposing the first 100 right now. So that's just shy of the 50% threshold. So are you recommending that they include this as part of this first 100 lots?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
all right.
Don't want it to be lost.
Understand, yeah. The next one had to do with recreation that's specified in sections 8.2 and 8.3, and that is the sidewalks and the that's the 5-foot sidewalks on both sides of streets. that should that be included as part of this subdivision. And I think we would require that anyway. And then in 8.3, the 1,900 linear feet perimeter sidewalk around a portion of the real property is depicted in the offset. All right.
Again, relates directly to parcel 5.
Right. And this says specifically, this sidewalk must be completed within 2 years of recording the final plat for parcel 5. So it seems like once the rest of parcel 5 is completed, then that condition kicks in. So it sounds like what you're requesting is for it to be kicking in with this first 100 lots.
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
Otherwise, it could be lost.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, on that point, the way that, and again, the developer's agreement was recorded over a year ago, or about a year ago. The, 8.3 identifies,
This would be required already, but what he's talking about is this right here.
right, and complete with 2 years of recording of the final plat for parcel 5. So the intention of that, as I recall, was that when parcel 5 is completed, and that's beyond phase 1, that sidewalk would be then constructed within the 2 years. So we're only approximately half of parcel 5 at this time. So when we come back with the rest of parcel 5, that's what I believe was intended for that to kick in at that time. The sidewalks interior along phase 1 are part of our construction drawings, and that's all included. And the park is as well. But that wasn't intended until parcel 5 was completed for that sidewalk. And it's a sidewalk to nowhere around a portion of the perimeter of the site.
Well, I have to ask the question, why are we only doing a portion of parcel 5? Because I think the agreement contemplated that if you wanted to phase it, you would do parcel 5, you would do parcel 6, parcel 7. So frankly, you're creating a problem by dividing up parcel 5.
Well, what we're doing is trying to make an economically feasible
I
project
understand
start to move forward. The initial front investment for a project of this size with all the off-site improvements, the big public boulevards, stormwater, sidewalks, we're extending utilities almost a mile, is far, far greater than phase 1, 2, 3 could afford. But we're trying to get that first phase started, see how the market responds, and then move forward depending on how the market does with the rest of it. And that's why we spent so long negotiating this developer's agreement, is because we just can't do everything in the first phase. It's just not feasible. We'd love to do it if it was less expensive or possible, but the project has to be financially feasible, and it's just not with phase 1. So that's why that agreement was made.
I have no problem with still including that as a condition, subject to staff and the applicant further reviewing and negotiating that item. And obviously, it's still up to city council, whatever they do.
Right. The city council did approve it the way it's written, as I know you're aware.
I understand, but I'm not sure they thought you were going to only do a portion of parcel 5.
We didn't know at the time either. No, we didn't. So
So
I would agree with you.
I would just challenge you and staff come up with a solution.
And then, as far as the traffic study goes, we do already have an approved traffic study. Just so you're aware, it's on record
I haven't
here.
seen it.
No problem, I understand. And then I just had a quick question on item 10. You mentioned the off-site easements. Was that intended for the water main?
Yes, water
Okay,
and
great.
sewer.
I just want to make sure.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So the next one had to do with the ownership of, okay, so updating the ownership? Or did I miss it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then the last one there had to do with the easements for water and sewer be required approval of sketch plat.
Those are through that other property, and he says they'll provide an easement.
So that's 8 I have altogether. Am I missing any?
Yeah, I had one more, the transfer of the fire station. You missed
Okay.
as well.
And so what's being requested there as a condition is that that should be part of this first 100, approval of this first 100 lots. So again, we're asking city council to consider negotiating an amendment to the plan potentially, or to the development agreement potentially.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. So that's 9 altogether, what I have, conditions.
You seconded.
Seconded, yes.
Member Baker?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Member Severs?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, we have a couple more items. This one is probably going to be, I don't know how much you want to discuss it, or if maybe you want to take a few minutes of a break, or if you're willing to go, you're ready to go forward. I'm asking if you would like to take 5 minutes, or...
5 minutes, I would.
Okay.
But just 5.
Just
These guys have been waiting all night.
I'm sorry? Oh, meeting, the meeting, please come to order. It's okay, take your time.
The next item before you tonight is item number 9F, and it starts on page 49 of your packet. This was added onto your agenda at last minute, last Friday, at the request of an applicant for a business tax receipt. This has to do with a request that the Planning and Zoning Commission make an interpretation of the allowable uses within inside the planned industrial development zoning district. The city's land development regulation states that the duties of the Planning and Zoning Commission includes interpretation of uses permitted. I included that section of the code in the agenda packet for you to review. It's on page 54 of your packet. It tells you the duties of the powers of, I'm sorry, yes.
Wait till we get caught up here.
Okay.
Thank you. Why is mine?
Thank you. Page 49 of your packet. I included a section of the code, it's page... I'll remember one day. Section 31-31, and it states here the powers and duties of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and one of them is interpretation of uses permitted. This is not a power of the City Council. This is specifically for you to determine. So what you're going to be asked to do here tonight is to either accept the staff's interpretation of what uses are allowed in this zoning district, or reject staff's interpretation and accept the applicant's interpretation of the code. Recently, the staff was approached with the question whether truck repair can be permitted in the PID zoning district. It is staff's interpretation that truck repair is auto repair, which is a specific use listed in the use table of our code. It is limited, automobile repair is allowed in the M1, which is a light industrial warehousing zoning district, the M2, which is our heavy industrial zoning district, and the M3, which is our infill industrial district, primarily located along South Street. It is specifically prohibited in the PID, the Planned Industrial Development District. The applicant disagrees with staff's interpretation and has requested that the Planning and Zoning Commission make an interpretation as to the uses permitted in the PID zoning classification. So I've included a copy of the business tax receipt that was submitted to us and a specific language to the code. I'll refer you to page 51 of your packet, and this is the copy of the business tax receipt that was submitted to us. This is for a proposed to allow, the applicant was requesting that the business type of automotive repair shop be allowed at 1525 White Drive. If you're not familiar with where that is it's a roadway that is parallel and behind the police station. So you're going down the Columbia Boulevard? Grissom, excuse me. Well, then you turn down south on Grissom, and then you'll see White Drive on your right side. And there are several industrial uses and buildings out there, but they're all zoned PID, Planned Industrial Development. I've included in page 53 of your packet a motor vehicle repair registration certificate from the state of Florida. Again, the powers of the P&Z on page 54. Page 55 of your packet, you will see again those zoning districts, and the key in the zoning use table, it says P, L, or S, or I'm sorry, C. P stands for permitted by right. L means it's permitted, but there are conditions you have to meet. C means it's permitted, there are conditions, and you got to go through a public hearing for it. That's a conditional use permit. If you don't see the letter there in a box underneath that zoning district, it means it's prohibited. So what you see here is that a automobile repair under section 28-97 of the code this is page 55 of your packet, is permitted in the M1, the M2, and the M3 industrial zoning districts, but it's specifically not permitted in the PID. You'll see in subparagraph B, right underneath that table, a definition of automobile repair. And it includes the words truck and trailers and similar vehicles. And then there are standards for that particular use if there was an L or a C for that particular use. So. On page 57 of your packet, I've included a copy of the PID zoning development standards, and it includes a purpose statement, subparagraph A, inside that table, again on page 57 of your packet. I'm going to read it to the record here. A PID district is created to provide for areas of large scale, high technology, and other clean, light industry in an attractive park-like atmosphere. It is further intended that this district be utilized to promote industrial activity, more efficient and economical industrial land use, harmony in physical design and industrial relationships, variety and amenity in industrial development, and the protection of adjacent and nearby existing and future non-industrial uses and activities. Planned industrial development districts will encourage originality, flexibility, and innovation in site planning and land and development, including architecture, landscaping, and graphic design. This district is intended to develop within those areas identified as planned industrial park on the city's comprehensive plan land use. This property has that particular land use. Developments within the PID zoning district shall also meet the regulations established further on this page here, including the lots, setbacks, and so on. That is not an issue. It's specifically just the use here. On page 60 of your packet, I've included the full use table. And the uses are separated into different categories. The first list of uses are agricultural. Underneath them are residential. And then further down, it's commercial. Automobile repair is a specific use that's listed under commercial. If you scroll over to the right, you'll see in that where it's allowed or in the different zoning districts, and in the cell there for PID, again, it is prohibited. Mr. Olivio is the applicant. He is here to answer any questions or to present his case on this. My understanding, based on conversations with him, is that he intends to utilize a building that currently has a business there already, that has it's listed as a wholesale distribution type business. My understanding too is that they have trucks there that they own or maintain, and that they repair them on the side. So that's not prohibited. It's an accessory to their primary business. The issue here is that Mr. Olivio has requested that the business tax receipt allow him to operate an automobile repair strictly, but also in conjunction with the original business there. So he's not replacing the business. He's going to be working alongside that same business that's there at this property at 1525 White Drive in the same garage. I was told also that he's doing this in a contract basis with the original business there to repair their trucks. But when I asked Mr. Olivio if he's going to be open to allowing other people or other businesses to bring their trucks or vehicles to him, to this garage, to repair their vehicles too, that's where we objected. It was akin to maybe having an automobile Pep Boys or other kind of garage automobile repair service in this particular zoning district, which is not consistent with that use. I'm sorry, not consistent with that zoning district. So that's where we had an issue, where we conflicted and we denied the business tax receipt. So with that, I'll try and answer any questions you have about this.
Does the commission have any questions? Staff? No questions? So what's the commission's desire on this?
We have open up
Cards.
the public hearing and ask for
I'm
cards.
sorry, we have to open this to the public. Anyone, do we have any cards on this?
Yes, we do. Joseph Olivo.
Thank you.
I'm Joe Olivo. I'm 5645 Bob White Trail, Mims, Florida. The reason why I differed with his his denial one was the PID, the area, has already allowed other businesses in, whether it's due to economic troubles or terminology, definitions, interpretation. There's 2 mechanic shops in there already. 2 places working on vehicles, making vehicles, producing vehicles, fixing vehicles, selling vehicles. One is on that street, one is on White Drive, and one is on, I think it's Chaffee, around the corner, where White Drive turns into Chaffee. The shop was already a mechanic shop. It doesn't do work solely for itself, never did. Yes, it did work for its own trucks, but not every truck that they have on the site is all theirs. But I'm not trying to determine what he did for business. We're taking over that mechanic shop. The entities that have the property are no longer functioning the way they're working. The company that owns the property that started the business there is no longer in business. He now owns the property. The other business that took over his business of trucking no longer wants to be the sole honcho to take care of trucking, truck drivers, delivery, road service, whatever he does with his dump trucks and a garage. So an opportunity arose to take it over, work with him, pretty much have already something in hand, make it easy, and opportunity for other contracts. The reason why we'll take in other businesses is because I think the area is already retail. You have retail other stores on White Drive that you have let in, function and operate no different than a Pet Boys or a Tire Kingdom or anybody else. You have a print shop in it, you have a real estate office, you have a dance center, all on White Drive, in the building where the other mechanic store is. We just assumed, why we didn't ask first, but we started a lot of stuff there and got a lot of things prepared, being that there was a mechanic shop already in it, and started cleaning everything up and getting it ready to suit us, because we didn't think it would be denied. We're going to be working on heavy trucks, dump trucks, and diesel. That's what their specialty is, diesel trucks for an industrial development technology. Not everything in there is high-tech technology. It's just another business that's going to be servicing other businesses in there. Industry, or the PID, Planned Industrial Development Area, they need all trucks. That's what they all operate from. And there are no other specific diesel mechanics or qualified people in the area that do it. Those ones that were around are slowly going away. It's an opportunity. I believe that it is in a pretty good location. It's out of the way, it's working on trucks, and it's better than US 1. You know, maybe not so much hidden, but yet, you know, that's where industrial goes. It's industrial vehicles, commercial industrial vehicles. That's what we planned. So. Tom, you want to go?
Bradley Barger.
We're just simply trying to start, you know, a business. Like you said, it's, you already have a couple of businesses there that's already doing, you know, the operations and things like that. I mean, you obviously have the National Guard over there that has automotive going on over there. I mean, they've got their tires stacked on the side of the fence and everything down through there. So it's not like we're trying to, you know, come in here, push our way in and make you upset or anything. It's just that we're asking for the opportunity that everybody else has there.
Have you actually opened a business and are operating?
We're trying to get it to where we can operate legally. We don't want to do anything illegally. We want to have our business legal. That's what we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you.
But they already have. I mean, the thing I don't understand is, maybe you can clarify it for me, is you got a guy there that owns a business that works on trucks in an industrial area. Up here, what do you call it, the PID? Or whatever you call that area. The guy already does it with his own equipment, and it's allowed. And, I mean, if I change the alternator on your car or my car, it's still the same thing. It's just a different vehicle, a different owner. I don't understand why it wouldn't be allowed. And then you have a couple of other guys already doing car restoration, things like that in the same area. It's the same automotive type situation. So that's, you know, we're here to clarify and try to, you know, get a business going that's, you know, hopefully going to help all of us.
I have a question for staff. How are the other businesses in that area permanent, and what are they doing business as if they're doing car restoration or other like business in that area? What type of business do they say they're running?
So the example at 1525, there is a business there that is received a BTR several years ago as a wholesale and distribution. And so they are allowed to, and so they're doing repair of their own vehicles. That's accessory.
No, I understand
to it.
that one, but he
Okay.
said there's another example where it's a different business, that their business is car restoration in this same area.
There, Mr. Olivia brought up another business called Drop Dead Customs to me. And when we researched that, some members here may remember, the property or the business owner of that business came to the P&Z asking for the same relief from the use interpretation. And it was determined that what they are doing is automobile restoration. And so that of antique vehicles, and then that was the conclusion of that. So he was able to get his BTR based on that interpretation from the Planning and Zoning Commission.
So which business type is that on our little grid here?
The staff interpreted that to be automobile repair, and we denied him his BTR in that. That's why he came to the P&Z and asked for a different interpretation. And
So he got relief?
He got relief based on the evidence that he provided to the P&Z at that night.
So if he was given relief, what's the difference between what these guys are asking for?
What he's asking for, I can't say what the Planning and Zoning Commission, how they came to their conclusion, based on the evidence that was presented to them at the time, was much different than what Mr. Olivio is presenting you tonight. He's giving you straightforward a BTR that says it is automobile repair, basically.
Right, but
I can't challenge that in any other way, and I don't think P&Z can.
No, well, my question is, if the other person said he was doing auto restoration, where does that fall? Is there a classification for that on the grid on page 60?
No, ma'am.
So how does that's not a business then?
I can't answer that. I can't, because that was the interpretation of the P&Z at that time. Now, I can provide you information about what they determined, but they determined that what he was proposing at that time, based on the evidence and written evidence that the applicant provided at that time, fit a different category. They didn't select which specific category. They just said that it was consistent with the uses allowed within that zoning district.
Yeah.
As an automobile restoration, which is not automobile repair.
That's
The BTR.
That's a stretch.
No, I tell you what, no, I remember that conversation, okay? And we did say that automobile restoration is quite different than automobile repair. When you're restoring an automobile, okay, you are specifically dealing with one automobile generally, maybe two, okay? And you are going for custom parts. It's not like you have a shop there and you're repairing the automobile.
No, but, I mean,
You are
automobile
making a-
restoration is fabrication, it's breaking down and rebuilding engines and carburetors and all kinds of things.
But it's not a repair shop.
It's
not-
repairing automobiles one at a
No,
time.
there's a difference in restoration and repair. And it's not a fine line. It is, automobile restoration is
I
automobile
disagree.
restoration. And I've seen businesses that do automobile restoration, and they're not general repair shops. They are custom shops.
But the work that they're doing is absolutely automobile repair. It's just, it's at a different level.
Yes, but
they're repairing automobiles.
Yes, but wait a minute. You have to, Okay. What we're saying is when you have a custom shop and these automobile shops that do these restorations, okay, are doing a specific job, it's a custom job, all the parts are special ordered, you're not just bringing the car in for a repair. You're rebuilding or starting out with a new automobile. It's just different. It's not a repair shop. It's
I
totally
disagree.
different. Totally different business.
Okay.
Totally different business.
I disagree.
But anyway, that's the way
Can-
we looked at it when we did it.
Can I answer that?
Sure.
I rebuilt a 67 Camaro. I chose to rebuild it to today's specs. So I walked in today's stores where you can buy your GM parts to put on your car, to put on mine. No difference. Same screws, nuts, and bolts. Same ones that came off, put the same ones that you buy today to fix yours are on mine. And I was willing to bring the paperwork and the pictures to show that that's what they were. And I was told that didn't need to be brought in. That's not evidence. And the
Incorrect.
person who did that work was, most of it, screaming performance. Who's on White Drive?
Let me backpedal just a little bit. And I think that we need to, when we're talking about truck repair, now let me ask you, what kind of trucks are we talking about?
Anything diesel, heavy equipment, dump trucks, the ones that are going in and out of that industrial park.
Okay, when you're.
Local drivers.
How much of a square foot of a building, how much area space would you need to do this?
The garage we have, that's been there for 30 years.
And how big is it?
I don't know, it's a little over 2,000 square feet, we believe.
Okay.
Plus, we have a pad outside and some stuff like that. Because some of the vehicles, when you have to do certain things. Right. You can't bring them in. It's best to do them outside to get certain things done, especially when you have to take stuff off the back or you have to lift the backs of a dump truck up, it's all accessibility and where you want to put it to do it. Easy accessibility. It's already there.
Does staff have any, can you help us with this, in any interpretation from the code to what we're trying to relate to here?
Let me answer the applicant's statement about not providing evidence. When he brought up these other examples, including drop-dead customs, what my response was, every use, I don't know how to compare what he's doing compared to what was determined at the P&Z at the time based on the evidence that the applicant at the time for drop-dead customs provided. He can certainly bring that up and bring that information to you to say, hey, this is what your precedent has been, or this is other examples. There's nothing wrong with that. That's his right. I did not inform him that he couldn't bring any evidence to you. What I need to point out, though, is that what was determined a few years ago with that business drop-dead customs, the motion was to accept antique automobile restoration as acceptable use, as an acceptable use in the PID zoning. And that was the motion, and that was what was approved. And that was based on the evidence that the applicant provided to you. And so the Planning and Zoning Commission did not agree with the city staff's interpretation of his particular business consistent with an automobile repair. That was the motion, that was the decision. Whether it's apples to apples, apples to oranges, we look at it on a case-by-case basis. The evidence that was provided to us for that particular application is different than what Mr. Olivio is telling you here. What I'm hearing, what I heard from him is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, how the business will operate. You're going to have an exclusive contract with the business that's there now to operate their vehicles. But you're also going to be open to other vehicles or other businesses bringing their vehicles for repair as well? And are you also open to other types of vehicles? Or is it strictly only trucks? So I think we just need clarification on that, but that's the kind of information I need.
That's why I was trying to answer before, the clarification of potatoes or apples or oranges. If I'm replacing an alternator, it doesn't matter which one I'm replacing it in. If you want me to tell you whose car am I going to work on, we're probably not going to do the guy down the road's vehicle. We're doing trucks. The guy down the road doesn't drive a truck. He doesn't have a diesel dump truck. He doesn't have a diesel 18 long-haul wheeler, or an 18-wheeler or long hauler. He doesn't. We're going to bring in business people. These are business people who have their vehicles that need them repaired someplace. And they need loyal, responsible, respectful mechanics to do so. People that know how to work on them. I don't know if you're familiar, but you're not going to work on a diesel truck the same way you're going to work on a regular car. Is there a difference? Sure there is. But it's still nuts and bolts. Still alternators and starters and filters and gas and engines and same thing. And the fact of an older car being a newer car, well, I can bring it to you. I can show you the pictures. I got all brand new stuff in it. I got brand new LS engines in it. I got brand new equipment, brand new tools, brand new. I use everything that they work on today.
And most of the dump trucks that we're working on over there are well over 15 years old, and some of them 20 years old. How is that old, Ken? 86. It's 1980s. Some of these things are 90s, 80s, and 90s. And you want to talk about old car restoration, you can come look at them any day. They're over there. I mean, that's our clientele that's over there right now. And none of them, I guarantee, there's maybe, one new one that's might be 2 years old. 2 years old. But most of them, 15, 20 years old.
I have a question for staff. Okay. Now, to some extent, and I don't know if the commission agrees, but truck repair, automobile repair, it's a repair job. You're dealing with mechanics, okay, and you're restoring engines or whatever else may happen to happen. However, while they're very similar, what concerns me is the impact of truck. And that seems to be I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but what would happen to, what would be the impact? Let's put it this way. What's the impact of having truck versus automobile in terms of the location, the adjoining businesses, the pollution? What would be the difference? And I know you're getting impatient here.
No.
Listening to me.
No. You make sense, and I have the answers. I have the answers.
There's a difference between automobile and truck.
Let me just read a definition in the code. Automobile repair, any building, structure, or improvements used for the repair and maintenance of automobiles, motorcycles, trucks, trailers, or similar vehicles, including but not limited to body, fender, muffler, or upholstery work, oil change and lubrication, painting, tire service and sales, or installation of automobile electronics, but excludes dismantling or salvage. That's the definition. That's on page 55 of your packet.
And if I may interrupt, Brad, that definition is applicable as you are determining tonight whether that is applicable in the planned industrial development, which zoning category says that PID district is created to provide for areas of large scale, high technology, and other clean, light industry in an attractive park-like atmosphere. And at the Drop Dead Customs presentation, the focus was on how clean that process is. And I would ask the applicant to comment on how clean and high technology the activity is that he proposes to conduct is different from the generic automobile repair, which is generally classified as not a clean technology.
May I also add too on that, what was going on with the Drop Dead Customs, what the P&Z decided to do was narrowly interpret their use based on the evidence that was given to them. So in their motion, I mean, they specifically said,
only antiques.
and accept that the motion to accept antique automobile restoration as an acceptable use. So they narrowly interpreted the use. If they said automobile repair is allowed in a PID, that would be in conflict with what the zoning code said. They'd probably ask City Council to amend the code. If they said that, we wouldn't be here today. We would go ahead and say he's consistent with your prior interpretation too. But that's not what you determined here. It was very narrow.
So the DMV says an antique automobile is anything over 25 years old.
I
So
can't.
as long as he doesn't repair anything that's less than 25 years old, then he should fall under the same rule.
I can't determine. I can't base.
But if that was the argument, it was narrowly defined as antique.
Right. Based on the evidence that was
So,
given to them.
based on that, as long as you don't take in any business from any truck that's newer than whatever 25 years ago is,
Can say
There was-
what they
Can I,
came up
can I
with was
answer some of the
automobile,
questions that she raised?
automobile restoration. They saw it as different from automobile repair. And so that's how they interpret it.
I know, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but if you go back and read your definition of auto repair, it says upholstery. It says all the elements that are very specific to auto restoration.
No, that's the definition.
We're talking about truck here. Big difference. It's apples and
No,
oranges.
But if you say that, then you're gonna have to go back to Drop Dead or whatever their name is and say you can't do any trucks.
We don't know if they do trucks.
Oh, I'm sure they do trucks.
I don't know that.
I'm sure they do, passenger trucks. And there is a difference between passenger trucks and what these guys are doing, which sounds like utility trucks.
You're talking about a pickup truck. Come on.
That's a truck.
Well, not, by his interpretation, truck is different. We're talking about a commercial vehicle here, not a, someone's pickup truck. That's not the same thing.
Can I answer her question? 3 months is what we've been doing, is cleaning up the shop. And I invited him to the shop, to come and look at the shop, 2 Mondays ago. More than welcome. And it's clean. Swept every day. It's a mechanic shop. It's clean. It wasn't before, it is now. So for clean, we clean. And our garage doors are open. You could see it. We hide nothing. Everything's right there.
Well, let me ask
The
you.
trucks outside that are already been there for 30 years, dumping their stuff outside, my partner's got it cleaned up.
Well, let me ask you a question. When you started your business there, in this location, okay?
We are trying to start our business there.
Oh, you're trying, okay. I thought you said you were, I thought you just
Well,
said you
they're
were.
taking over an existing business. They're not doing anything new. It's not new pollution, it's not new anything. This is an
Impact
activity that's
is
been happening
there.
there. It's just a new ownership
We're
of a
just gonna put a new name
subset of
to
the
it.
business.
And you've been working on trucks.
They work on trucks. We work on trucks. There's trucks there.
And those dump trucks have been coming up and down that city road for however long Hardly Able Trucking has been there, and all the others. So it's not doing any more damage to your streets or whatever you might think it's doing, or it'd already be there. It would already be showing, it would be showed up there already by now. I mean, it's, everybody's got, I mean, I'm a mechanic and I work over in Orlando. I'm just trying to get this going over here so when I travel over there. Believe me, I'm visited by the EPA at least 3 times a year over there. So I've been working for the same company that I worked for 17 years over there on diesels. So it doesn't matter if you're working on gas, it doesn't matter if you're working on diesel, it's got the same oil. The diesel, the fluid that it burns is a little different. It's all the same stuff, and it all has the same type of EPA. I mean, EPA's got a deal that you gotta go by. Your container's gotta be labeled used oil. I can't dump anything on the floor. I mean, you gotta be educated on the deal. We're not here to come pollute the city. We're here to do everything by the book in a place that's already been doing business, and we're trying to improve it and make it ours. That's what we're trying to do.
I have a question for staff. Are there any other truck repair or maintenance in the city that are located elsewhere, not necessarily in a PID? I mean, or do you know of any other related type business that's functioning today, other than what these gentlemen are doing?
You want me to answer that for you?
I can answer that.
Okay.
You can answer it.
You're asking me to name offhand what they're doing anywhere else in the city. I mean, I can say there's auto repair businesses inside the city, many places, including our commercial zoning districts. You mean the type of trucks that they have been working on? Or potentially are they limited themselves only to that type of truck? Or are they going to be opening their business up to other types of vehicles, including trucks?
But we want to work on diesel trucks, is what we want to work on.
There's obviously a reason why city came up with the PID and left out, you said specifically automobile repair. And there's a reason why I believe that city does that. I mean, city's been doing this for years and years and years. And when they limit in the code, they say, okay, this is automobile repair. That's what they mean, automobile repair. They don't mean truck repair. And so, if we're going to follow this and we approve these things as we go along, I really think that we have to stick to what the code says, and it says automobile repair. It leaves out truck repair. And the reason I say that is because there's an impact on the immediate area when you switch to trucks.
I'm sorry, automobile repair is not allowed in the PID. Automobile repair is not allowed in the PID. It's allowed in the PID?
Automobile repair?
No, that's why he's not allowed in there.
Not allowed in PID, that's correct, yeah.
So, PID, you cannot have any automobile repair.
Right.
Right.
Well, as a primary use, if you have a manufacturing business or a distribution business or an assembly business, something like that's industrial related, and they have a fleet of trucks, for example, and they are repairing their own vehicles, that's accessory to it. They could even have a showroom. That's accessory retail to the primary industrial use. But as a primary function of that business on that property, that's not consistent with the code.
Can the selling of parts, truck parts be also considered what he's explaining to me? Because we would like to intend to sell truck parts as well. Our own truck parts. And we have all the stuff already into play to do that. So it's connected to the industry.
Doesn't look like retail's allowed in the PID either.
As a primary use, it's not looked at as a primary use that's permitted in any zoning district. As an accessory to it, yes.
Right, but
So
I
you can
think
have-
he's saying, what if our primary was part sales and then our accessory was the
Part
repair?
sales would be a primary, if you're saying that's a primary use, that would be inconsistent with the code.
Right,
Because that would be a retail use allowed in an industrial zoning district.
right, that's what I'm saying. I think he was asking, could that be
Yeah.
their primary use?
But
And
that's
said
why I was
it's
asking
not.
about the already commercial places in there. You have, that's retail. That's the same thing. You're selling dance lessons, I'm selling real estate, and you have them in there. Those businesses are in there. They're on White Drive.
So staff, how are those businesses permitted, that they're allowed to be in there? if-
Can I answer that?
I'd have to investigate
No.
each one of those to
Can I
find out
answer
for
that?
sure.
Tough times. People who own property, they come to you and they ask for, hey, we need people in here. So when tough times are tough, you get somebody who's willing to pay the bill for your rent, for your property, for your
Well, I mean,
taxes.
has planning and zoning given other allowance or variance for this PID other than the one we already talked about?
None that I'm aware of, no. Oh, there was one other, yeah, excuse me, a few years ago, there was one for boat manufacturing. Hells,
Okay.
I believe, maybe, I
Hell's
don't
Bay, yeah.
remember
And what was the
exactly.
reason that they were allowed to go in there?
They were going to use raw material, which was not in,
It was an enclosed garage where all of the fumes were contained and all of the activity was done in a garage and in such a fashion that the PNC found it acceptable for where it was located. So to answer your question regarding what each of those different businesses, we would have to get the address in order to look it up and tell you what each BTR says. I pulled up White Drive in our system that would reveal these BTRs. The first one I see, 1625, is under review, a request for wholesale sales. There's so many addresses that it would take us a lot of time to give you answers to what's going on to all of these businesses. But I think that may be helpful for you in your review of this item.
Yeah, I mean, my recommendation would be that we table this until we find out what else is going on there, because it seems like at best, we've been inconsistent. If we let one car manufacturer do some, or, car repair, do something, and boats with engines, and I just think we need to understand what's really going on in this PID area and how these businesses are doing business as what, and do they fall under it? And if none of them do, or if many of them don't, I think we need to readdress what's going on.
let me just clarify. There are business licenses that are, business tax receipts are submitted to us, and we review them for consistency with the uses that are allowed in that zoning district. That's different from what they described to me on some of the businesses are doing differently from what their licenses are allowed them to do.
But that's
So
wrong,
that-
too.
Right, but that
Hold
is a
on now.
code enforcement issue
Now,
that's brought up.
I
Okay,
want to
but-
speak, hold on.
Time, please.
Yeah, let me, I'm going to interject.
Let staff finish, please, okay?
I don't want him to answer that one.
I will let you speak. You'll have all the time in the world. Staff, please continue.
That's all I wanted to mention, was that we will go by what is requested of us for approval of a business license. If Mr. Olivia wants to bring up issues or related uses that are going on in some of these businesses that are not consistent with that zoning, that's a different issue.
Okay.
First off, I had asked him if this is going to help us or deny us. The idea that I'm going to bring heat down people that have been in town for 38 years in business, legally running it for 38 years, and now I'm the butthole of society because I'm bringing heat down on everybody because somebody claims, oh, we got to reinvestigate this. It's not what I want to do. I don't want my name to it. I don't want my business names to it. I don't want my partners' names to it. It's not what we came here for. I don't want to interrupt anybody else's business.
I'm just trying for us not to be
Oh,
inconsistent.
I understand, but the interpretation now may go out there and we're going to start opening, knocking people's doors and saying, that's not our intent.
Sorry, sir, but that's the issue that you've brought up, is that what is going on that street is the planned industrial district
I didn't
needs to be
cause
looked
it.
at.
I didn't cause it, though. Nor do I want to be the blame to bringing heartache down somebody's source of income, way of living, in a tough time. They're not harming anybody.
We're not bringing
They're
up-
running businesses.
We're not bringing up the fact that we want to tell on people, you already allowed automotive stuff in there with the antique things. We're just asking, why can't we have a chance at it? I mean, you give everybody else a chance with it. We're not looking to knock, their doors down and close them down and beat them up. We're just here simply asking, have some lenience for us like you did those people. That's all. We're not looking, I'd rather, if it came to me running that guy out of business, I would tell my business I don't want to do it. I would say, just forget what I said here tonight, and I'll move on gracefully, or, move on and go do my job I've been doing for, 16, 17 years. I'm not here to beat somebody up. We're here asking for lenience, like you gave to other people. We're not here for you to go over there and say, oh, you're doing something wrong, and we're going to shut you down. We're not here for that. You obviously let them in there to do what they're doing under whatever they're doing. So it's automotive, no matter what way you look at it, whether it's a diesel, whether it's a boat engine, it's all automotive. You can say what it is, look up the definition, it's all the same. You've read it in your thing there. But that's all we're here for. And believe me, I'll walk away from this today if that's what you're gonna do, is you're gonna knock on people's doors and beat them down. I'll walk away from it today. We're just here asking for you to consider us as part of that deal over there. That's all we're doing.
Thank you.
Can we do something where, because they're taking over an existing business, we can allow it because it's business that's been happening already?
They're actually, well,
They're taking over a subset of business that's been happening in this same space.
correct, but it's a different type.
But
It's a different use.
But technically, yes.
Okay.
But it's exactly the same work that's been happening in the exact same property for 30 years. They're not adding space to do more of it. They're in the exact same space, doing the exact same business that's been happening. Ancillary, understood, ancillary to another business.
Okay.
But they're not adding anything. They're taking on, it's like, if I all of a sudden decide that I'm going to subcontract out part of my work, right?
I think I understand what you're going with this.
So-
So if they continue as an accessory ancillary to what's going on of the primary use?
Well, they'll be their own business.
Okay.
I mean, they'll be their own business entity. They're going to be a separate business from the business that exists today. But as long as they don't expand the garage space, as long as they don't have a bigger footprint, as long as they're not, they're doing the same business, the same work, not business, the same work that is being done in the same space today, then I think that we should allow that business, that work to continue.
Let me just propose this, because that sounds like they're not expanding it, but they're going to take over just the role that the current business there is doing as an ancillary to their original business. Just repairing their materials, repairing their trucks. If they take over that role exclusively just for that business, then they are acting in place of the original business, just continuing the ancillary use. But if they open, that's one thing that you could look at it narrowly that way, I think. I
Yeah,
think
but
that's
I'm
what you're
not sure
saying.
we know for sure that the business that's there right now isn't taking inside jobs.
If that would be an issue with code enforcement, because that would be inconsistent with the zoning. That's not an issue with us before tonight, because we don't have evidence of that.
Right.
If we're just hearing that. What I would, if this is where you're going with it, then what you're suggesting is that Mr. Olivia would restrict himself contractually with that way, with that business. I don't think he wants to go that way.
Can I speak?
Can I just interject here, okay? And if you look at what staff has presented to us in terms of the code and what it says staff was, okay, whether truck repair can be permitted in the PID zoning classification is staff's interpretation that truck repair is automobile repair use, which is limited to M1, M2, and N3 districts, prohibited in the PID. It specifically says here, it's prohibited. It doesn't, it says you can do it in M1, M2, N3, and it's prohibited in PID.
Right, but we've also.
And that's what we have.
But we've also allowed a car restoration, which is car repair, to exist in the PID.
Two of them. There's two.
No, it says car repair is limited to M1, M2,
Right.
and N3.
But
and prohibited in PID. It
Right.
says it, it's very clear.
I understand that's what the code says. But,
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is this body has given permission to car restoration businesses, which are car repair, in the PID.
Two of them.
And I'm just trying to not
But
be
there's a difference
inconsistent.
between truck and car. The impact is very, very different.
No, no. The state of Florida, DOT regulations that give us a license, calls them all classified under the same rule. The rules all apply, are the same laws, same definition, same manufactured codes, same warranted, everything that has to be regulated by the state, all under the same, from diesel on down to motorcycle, same thing.
I don't want to argue the point, okay? But it's very specific, and there's a difference between trucks and automobiles. And the impact is different in terms of the repair, the volume of stuff, the equipment that you use is bigger, the whole 9 yards. It's just different. And automobiles, restoration, that's a different thing altogether than truck repair. It's not the same thing. There's two different things. They're two different products. They're separate. They are not the same.
Have you ever done it?
When you register your vehicle, do you do it at the DMV?
I'm sorry?
When you register your vehicle, it's not different. You do, I have to register them both at the same DMV.
Registration, your truck and your automobile, your tractor, whatever else. They provide.
It's an
that's
automobile,
the law.
sir, and
What we're doing here is, we already said.
What about if we call it,
Here, but
what if we call it truck
says-
restoration? Would that be
it says
different?
Automobile repair use, which is limited to M1, M2, and N3. If we want to change it, that's on staff. I'm sorry. If staff wants to change it, they can do that. They can change the code, okay? They can do that, but I'm just telling you what we have in front of us here tonight, okay? Automobile use is limited to M1, M2, and M3. And this commission has to decide whether we're going to go with that or whether you're going to change it. That's simple.
You said they have the decision. They've already made a decision before we got here.
How
They
about-
denied me for day one.
No, we have a decision.
Well, he said they do, but.
May I make a
but-
suggestion?
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Yeah, point of.
Point of order.
Okay.
We allow the public to have a public hearing. We allow them to respond to questions, but we're far beyond that. We need to make a decision as to what action we're going to take. You can certainly ask the applicant if he has anything additional he wants to add, and give him every right to do that. But we're at the point where we need to make a decision one way or the other, or table the item.
I have one more thing to say. The direction he wants to take us would be to fail. If he said you can only work on the 3 trucks now that are potentially if he comes in code enforcement, that are owned by the one guy that's there now, and the other 9 trucks out there are not considered his, and I can't work on them, or the other guy down the road that lives in Port St. John that doesn't store them there, or the other guy in Mims that doesn't store them there, and I'm only limited to work on 3 vehicles, I might as well close before I start. So that is unacceptable, not even thinkable.
So the only point I haven't heard this commission discuss is whether there's an idea of changing the PID zoning code or asking council if there is any advisability to look into that.
I've had my light on a while. Sorry? I've had my light on a while. About 10 minutes, 20 minutes. I appreciate the fact that the applicant is not open to business without the necessary license and permits and wants to do it the right way. But that's the right way to do things. I was not on the commission at the time you considered this restoration or all I know is what the code says. And under 28-320 and 28-97, in my opinion, automobile repairs, truck repairs is not allowable use as a principal use in the PID zoning classification. Perhaps it should be in light of some of the comments and things I've heard. Perhaps it should be. But that's not the role of the Planning and Zoning Commission. We certainly could recommend to City Council that they have staff look at that issue. But based upon the code, which is our obligation to review and interpret as to whether or not this is allowable use, I don't see how we can say it is, because we're stuck with the plain language of the code. And so if you want a motion, I'll make a motion. If you want more discussion, that's fine. Or if you want to table the item, we can certainly do that. I don't think that's fair to them. They've been trying to get into business, and they need to know one way or the other. 3 months. They've been trying for 3 months. And I know the one gentleman, and he's doing the right thing, but likewise, sitting here, I can sympathize and understand. But my job as a commissioner is to follow the code and what it says. If staff, and frankly, I've seen this, I'm not saying this current staff, but I've seen historically interpretations that are not appropriate. I'll just use those terms that makes you wonder. But based upon the current language of the code, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we accept staff's interpretation of sections 28-97 and sections 28-320, that automobile repair or truck repair as a principal use, not as accessory use, is not allowed within the PID district.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Member Baker. Vice Chairman Shavir.
I'm sorry? How are we phrasing this? We're taking yes to mean we are approving this or not?
You're approving this motion.
The motion was that we accept staff's interpretation, that this is not truck repair, automobile repair is not a permitted use in PID.
Yes.
Secretary Chambers.
Oh, yes.
Member Noel Copeland.
No.
Member Severs.
Yes. And I would respectfully urge that you approach council, since they made the rules, they can change the rules.
Do you need my reason?
I would take it if you would like to provide it.
I think that if we're saying, I agree that that is the way the code's written, but it appears that that has been inconsistently applied. And if some auto repair is allowed there, then all auto repair should be allowed there. And so if the code should change, the code should change, but it shouldn't be arbitrarily applied.
Thank you.
Did you have one more thing to add on that? Is that it? Okay. We have one last thing, and that is, code requires us to submit this biannual waiver report to you. A few years ago, there was an ordinance adopted to allow an administrative waiver. In other words, to setbacks, for example, or to lot sizes up to a certain threshold. And then if someone asks for a waiver beyond that threshold, then they have to go get a variance to the Board of Adjustment. So what I've submitted to you is a report of the most recent waiver that we administratively approved, and it was for a property at 43 Linwood Avenue and for 1 foot of rear yard setback, encroachment into the rear yard setback for an attached screen porch. That's all I wanted to report. But we are required to provide this to you by ordinance when that was adopted in 2013.
Motion, we acknowledge receipt of report.
Second.
That's all I had. I don't have anything else to add here, so thank you.
That's it. Anything? We'll go through. Anybody have any comments? No?
Nothing to report.
No.
No report? Meeting's adjourned?
You have petitions and requests, sir.
I'm sorry.
Did you want to speak, ma'am?
I didn't think.
I do have something before we adjourn, if you all
Okay,
could.
please.
Curtis was kind enough to put some pictures. You all have asked me what I've been doing at previous times when I am on disaster relief, and Curtis was kind enough to put together.
Brad, you have the keyboard.
And he's very fast also. My husband worked at this all afternoon, and Curtis did it like that. So he was kind enough anyway, and they'll come up in a minute. Some of the pictures you saw at the beginning. So I just wanted to show you some of the things. This is actually a picture in, let's see, this is in Hosford, Florida. A lot of these places I had never been previously. And this is the kind of damage that we were seeing in the area. This is in Bristol. And you see how the trees are all snapped?
Yep.
About, however many feet up. So.
A little bit of debris in the road.
Oh, and this one in particular, this branch came through this lady's roof, and it actually hit her on the shoulder when it came down. This woman is very fortunate to be alive, and she was so gracious. I think the next picture will show the outside of her house. We got there and we thought, oh, it's not that big a deal, till we walked into her living room and saw the way she decorated. And so, yeah, this is all Tallahassee. This is North Tallahassee, getting closer to Havana. You see the power lines being propped up with just debris, sticks and things, and that's why, because the poles look like this in a lot of areas. I can't tell you. Well, these are our accommodations in a church that we were staying in. So these were, if you hold that one, if you would, for a moment. This is hard to tell. You can see there's a telephone pole down in the hole. We're standing on a road. You can see a pipe going in, and you can see power lines. Right behind me, I didn't take this picture, behind the lady that took the picture is a cemetery. And for some reason, the water rushed through and around and cut this massive gully and took you can see there's a whole telephone pole down in it, so I don't know how deep the thing is. She didn't quite get to the top of it. It's huge, massive area. It was just washed out. It's just very unusual. And a lot of areas look like this, where the trees are just snapped like matchsticks. And yeah, this is what you see up there. And you can see down at the very bottom, it's turned sideways, but those are some of the telephone or power lines. And we drove over power lines constantly. And this tree, when it came down, ripped up a 4-inch driveway, concrete driveway. So anyway, that's some of the things that we we're dealing with.